the April 28, 2026 Development Review Committee meeting. Roll call, please.
Mr. Cyrus?
Here.
Mr. Bartlett?
Here.
And Mr. Tyner?
Here. Can we all please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance?
United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We have no whole business, we have no minutes, so we'll move on to our only item here is application 2026 SODP 004T442 for Creek Crossing. And this is for overall development plan application. It's part of a subdivision process, and just let you know about the subdivision process. When you do a subdivision, there's a three application step. The first part is what we call an overall development plan, and this is what's before you right here, right now. And the ODP is, if you can think about flying in a plane, I guess you're at a 35,000 foot level. It is a generalized plan with some detail, a master plan, an overall kind of development plan with, some analysis that is part of that. Once the ODP, if the ODP is approved, then the next application, which is a totally different application, is called a preliminary plat. Now, the preliminary plat application is where you have most of your engineering and your design and all your, really, a lot of your details. And that's where all your construction plans are, your grades, your design, and those type of things. And that's at the second stage of the application. And if that's approved, then it goes on to what we call a final plat. That is a technical, creating lots of records and those type of things. So what we're talking about today is the first step of the process, called an overall development plan. And I'm gonna, our attorney, I think has some words right now before we start with the application.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. So let me explain the procedure and the format of this hearing before the DRC. This is for the benefit of the public, so you know what to expect. So this is the hearing of the Development Review Committee, or the DRC. The DRC reviews, as Mr. Tyner provided, projects for the technical aspects of the Land Development Code. That's what we call Article 3 of Land Development Regulations. So that governs site planning and subdivisions. So what this hearing is not, it is not a rezone. So the hearing before this body is quasi-judicial in nature. That's kind of like a fancy term that just means that this body is acting more like a court and somewhat like a court. And they must take into account all oral, written, or demonstrative evidence presented when making their decisions. So their decisions on these cases must be based on what we call competent substantial evidence. And that's the level of evidence that this body is looking for. And what that means is, it's defined that evidence a reasonable mind would accept to support a conclusion. So it's not things that are speculative and not things that are just like, just pure opinion, right? We're looking for competent and substantial evidence. If you present any evidence, like a picture or a poster or a report for the DRC's consideration, we need to keep that for the record. We will not get that back. We can get you a copy, but we need to keep it as part of the record. So here's how the order of the presentation is going to go. So staff is going to introduce the item, and they will answer any questions posed by the DRC. And then after staff finishes their presentation, the applicant of the ODP will present their presentation and answer any questions of the DRC. Here we have a group representing the Spruce Creek fly-in, and they've been granted a party intervener status. So they will provide their presentation. They have 20 minutes overall to present with their witnesses and evidence. And then after the party intervener, we will take public comment on the item. So any individual who's not associated with the group representing that, and you'd like to speak individually, you can do so. I think Mr. Tyner is going to give you 3 minutes, and then after we get through all the public comment, we're going to close public comment, and the applicant will have the opportunity to rebut any public comment or any evidence presented. After that is finished, we go to the DRC for discussion among the DRC members. The DRC members can recall or call any speaker to ask any further questions or clarification. After that discussion is done, we will head to a vote for the DRC. So you may not like the decision of, whichever way it goes. There is an appeal process built into that. So any person aggrieved can appeal the decision by filing a written appeal with the Land Development Division within 30 days after the decision is rendered. And that appeal is reviewed by the county council. If you file an appeal, the appeal must state fully the specific grounds of the appeal and all the facts relied upon by the petitioner. The county council may consider those items presented in the petition, items presented during this hearing, and any related review evidence. So, and the council, upon appeal, may first affirm and modify the order of the DRC. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. So now we'll go on to, we hear from staff and their presentation. And Steve?
Good morning, Steve Chan for planning. So this application is for the Creek Crossing Overall Development Plan, which is a 111-lot residential conservation subdivision on a 125-acre site. The subject site is located in the Port Orange area between the Spruce Creek Fly-In and a Quiet Place in the Country communities. So the location and aerial maps are on screen, which provides a visual depiction of the surrounding area. You can see a Quiet Place to the west and Spruce Creek to the east. In addition to the required conservation management plan, the applicant provided a multitude of supplemental documentation to assist in staff's review, such as a draft traffic impact analysis, preliminary stormwater analysis, environmental impact analysis, cultural resource assessment, and utility report. These additional documents are typically required at the next phase of the project, the preliminary plat. This next slide has some key information about the site that will set up some of the points discussed later in the presentation. It is currently zoned rural residential, RR, rural agriculture, A2, and resource corridor, RC. RR permits 1 acre lots and A2 permits 5 acre lots. The RC area, shown in green, is typically not developed but requires a minimum lot area of 25 acres. It's important to note that most of the site has a future land use of urban low intensity, which can be developed at up to 4 units per acre. The other future land use designation is Environmental Systems Corridor, or ESC. This corresponds to the RC area on screen. The RC-ESC area is within the Smoker Farms Village local plan area. This local plan has specific policies to govern development. As we'll discuss a bit later, the developed area of the site is outside the local plan area, but staff did review this application as if all of it was included. It's also subject to the Environmental Core Overlay, or ECO, and the Natural Resource Management Area, or NORMA. ECO is an overlay that was adopted to implement smart growth policies to move development to compact areas and encourage environmental conservation. One such tool is the conservation subdivision. NORMA requires the submission of an EIA and also requires greater buffers from wetlands. Finally, the site will receive essential utilities from the city of Port Orange. So this slide shows the ECO and NORMA overlays on the left. ECO is in the green hatch and NORMA is in orange. The map on the right shows street maintenance. The roads within a quiet place in the country are county-maintained local streets, while the roads within Spruce Creek are privately maintained local roads. This slide shows the ODP conceptual plan. Lots are located in 2 separate locations. Lots 1 through 57 are placed north to south on the upland area of the larger parcel. Lots 58 through 111 are placed in groups on the smaller square parcel. Generally, all the lots front on Creek Crossing Road. However, lots 58 through 73 front on a small loop, and lots 90 through 111 front on cul-de-sac road in the southeast corner. Creek Crossing Road terminates in the far southeast corner into a gate which acts as a secondary emergency access entrance from Russell Road. Proposed amenities include a pickleball court, passive open space areas with walking paths, an 8-foot natural trail, and an 8-foot compacted grass trail. The existing wooden bridge on the southwest property boundary will be removed. The conservation area is located along the western boundary and includes all of Spruce Creek except for the bridge crossing. This includes a 165-foot natural buffer and a 150-foot wetland buffer. Environmental permitting has also mandated a 275-foot setback from Spruce Creek. Access to the site is through Creek Crossing Road and the proposed span bridge. Stormwater retention is located throughout, including along the north side near the entrance, the west side between lots and Spruce Creek, and on the square parcel around the southern lots. So development projects such as conservation subdivisions are required to go through the three-step approval process, as Mr. Tyner indicated. We're currently in the first step, the ODP, which is considered conceptual approval. This is where overall site layout, access, and the environmental constraints are identified. The approving group for this application is the DRC. The next step is the preliminary plat, or PPL stage. This step is highly technical and is the point where the construction plans are developed and submitted for review. These are engineered plans that provide exact specifications for stormwater, traffic, and access. The approving group is also the DRC. Upon receipt of the PPL development order, construction is authorized to begin. The final step is the final plat, or FPL. During this phase, all design and horizontal construction has been approved. Then, the FPL development order is issued, the FPL is recorded in the corporate court, and individual lots can be sold. The county can officially accept any public infrastructure or right-of-way 1 year after. So all conservation subdivisions are required to be consistent with the county's comprehensive plan. As I mentioned earlier, the site is ULI and ESC future land use. ULI permits up to 4 units per acre, and ESC permits 1 unit per 25 acres. And all residential development is occurring within the ULI area of the site, shown in tan color. When factoring all density allowances on site, the maximum density permitted is 203 units. The project is proposing 111 units. In addition, conservation subdivisions have density bonuses available if wetlands are preserved or if most of the site is set aside for open space. The maximum density bonus is 25%. This project is not utilizing it. They are instead choosing a lower number and are clustering units in the upland areas. The Tomoka Farms Village local plan overlaps with the ESC area on the site, and this is indicated by the red hatch and the very thick red line on the map. As a result, there is no development of lots within the local plan area. The only development is the bridge for access. Overall, staff found the project consistent with the local plan's policies. It is consistent with policy TOM 1.1.1, as there is no change to future land use. It is consistent with policy TOM 1.1.2, and is using essential utilities to prevent potential contaminants from septic tanks to Spruce Creek. And it is consistent with policy TOM 1.1.3, as there is no rural future land use, and the project clusters the residential units. And it is consistent with policy TOM 1.1.4. Per the draft traffic impact analysis, development traffic will not cause any road segments to exceed the adopted level of service. The TIA must be approved before a PPL development order is issued. As you can see on this slide, all of the residential development is outside the local plan area. So all conservation subdivisions are also required to meet standards in section 72-547 of the Land Development Code. This includes a max cap of 600 units, a conservation management plan, and perimeter buffers with a 50-foot minimum and 100-foot average. In addition, 60% of the site must be permanently protected with development rights centered. This includes conservation and open space. Per 72-547, conservation includes wetlands, water courses, water bodies, and buffers, wildlife habitat, and other areas unique to the rural character of the site. Open space includes passive recreation, accessory buildings and improvements necessary for recreational use, and stormwater management and septic drainage systems. The remaining 40% of the site may be utilized as developed land for residential units and roadways. So after review of the project, staff found these requirements are met. There are 111 units, which is well below the cap. The draft conservation management plan is being developed with environmental permitting. The permanently protected area of the site is 78.4 acres, or 62%. And the developed area of the site is 46.88 acres, or about 38%. In addition, there is a 165-foot buffer for 73% of the site, and a 50-foot buffer for 27% of the site, so the averages are met as well. Upon direction from staff, the applicant provided a preliminary stormwater analysis for review. Development engineering reviewed all submittals and found the conceptual design acceptable for the ODT phase. Final engineering and stormwater analysis will be required during the PPL phase. In addition, the proposed bridge will be required to demonstrate zero rise in Spruce Creek Canal after construction. The current iteration of the project has impacts to wetlands on 10 lots, which is approximately 42,900 square feet in total. Impacts to non-exempt wetlands, or wetlands larger than half an acre, are limited within the conservation subdivisions to stormwater, floodplain compensation, roadways, or utility crossings. They may not be impacted for lot creation. The applicant has requested waiver 1 to this requirement. This waiver is up for DRC consideration. Spruce Creek is also an outstanding Florida water with a riparian habitat protection zone. The site is proposing central utilities, which will prevent groundwater leaching into the creek. And there is also a 275-foot buffer from the creek. The only impacts are from the proposed bridge. Typically, conservation subdivisions are required to provide a field-verified tree survey for historic and specimen trees at the PPL phase. The applicant provided a partial tree survey for the development area. Any waivers for historic tree removal will occur during the PPL. They have requested waiver 3 to utilize a statistical analysis for historic and specimen trees in the conservation area. This is an area of no impact aside from the bridge. There is also a land development code requirement to limit the clearing of trees to a maximum of 20% of approved lots in 1 calendar year. They requested waiver 4 of this requirement as they want to develop the residential lots in 1 phase. Environmental permitting did not object to these 2 waiver requests. The site's proposed access is through the Quiet Place and Country subdivision by Creek Crossing Road. Creek Crossing Road is a 60-foot public right-of-way, originally approved by a plat on May 9, 1974. I've marked it in blue on the screen. There is also a 10-foot riding and hiking easement outside of this on the north side of the road. This is marked in red. As we saw earlier, the roadways within this community are county-maintained local roads. The roadway is currently 20 feet in width, which does not meet the county requirements and is considered a substandard road. The minimum requirement is 24 feet. Therefore, the applicant has requested waiver 2 to allow connection to the existing 60-foot right-of-way with existing pavement width of 20 feet. Development engineering did not object to this waiver. The proposed bridge is required for access to the development site. The design plans will be required at the PPL phase with project construction plans. Construction and maintenance will require the creation of some kind of maintaining entity, such as a community development district, Staff has included this as a condition. Since the project was originally submitted as a PUD rezoning in early 2025, staff has received over 400 letters of opposition from the public. The common themes and issues raised in the letters include stormwater and flooding, adverse impacts to Spruce Creek, traffic congestion, and the impacts of site access with the bridge. The next steps for this project are dependent on the approval of Waiver 1, which is for the impacts to 42,900 square feet of wetlands for the creation of lots. If approved, the project can proceed to the PPL phase. If this waiver is denied by the DRC, revised plans are required. During the PPL phase, the project will transition from conceptual plans to engineering plans. During this phase, all technical supplemental documentation must be completed. This includes the TIA, stormwater analysis, tree mitigation, and bridge plans. In addition, the maintaining entity for the bridge must be established. Since the requirements of the comprehensive plan, local plan, and conservation subdivision have been met, staff is recommending approval of conditions for the proposed ODP. Staff is recommending one condition, which is to establish the maintaining entity for the bridge construction and maintenance. Again, waiver request 1 is for the approval of impacts of 42,900 square feet of wetland for residential lots. Waiver request 2 is to allow connection to the existing 60-foot right-of-way with existing 20-foot pavement. Waiver 3 is to allow a statistical analysis for historic and specimen trees in the conservation area. Waiver 4 is to remove the limitation that restricts construction to 20% of buildable lots per year. Staff does not object to waivers 2 to 4. And county staff is available to answer any questions regarding the review of this application.
Thank you, Mr. Chance. Y'all, at this time, have any questions for staff? Next, we'll hear from the applicant.
Good morning.
Good morning.
For the record, I'm Mark Watts, law firm of Cobb Cole, 231 North Woodland Boulevard, Atlanta. And I'm going to see if I need to get the clicker, because I've got a couple of things to work through on the presentation. Oops, Mark, I have it. Okay. Again, it's good to be with you this morning. I'm going to give you a little bit of an overview on a little bit of the history of this project, and then kind of walk through a lot of the same things that Stephen just covered in the staff report. But I'd be remiss in not starting out by thanking staff. I think anytime we're dealing with something in a sensitive area like this, it's important to take the time, to kind of work through any questions that come up through the process. We submitted this proposal originally as a PUD early last year. We received some feedback from staff. We received feedback from the community with regard to the concept of changing the entitlements on the property. And at that time determined the better approach would be to utilize the existing tools that the county has. You have the conservation subdivision regulations as part of the county code for 15 or so years, I believe, roughly. This, I believe, is the third proposal that has come in under that conservation subdivision structure in those 15 years. And really those have all occurred, and the other two have occurred within the past 5 years. So I think that it's in part a recognition of the need to make sure that we're following the path that you've created in your code to make sure that development is preserving and providing environmental protection as it moves forward. That's something that I think has been very keenly pointed out to us through this process by staff, but I want to make sure that again, thank them for the work that they've done on the review. They've, I think, resulted in some good changes to the overall project. I'll detail some other changes as we go through this that have resulted from some of our conversations with residents in the area, including some ongoing conversations with representatives from Spruce Creek Client in particular about some additional conditions we're continuing to work through with them. So with that, Stephen went into a lot of specific detail, and the staff report provides a lot of specific detail with regard to your comprehensive plan. But I went through and just tried to provide a little bit of a summary. But the comp plan has multiple sections that support compact environmentally sensitive development patterns. The focus on accommodating growth and accommodating residential growth while making sure strategies are implemented to preserve natural resources. You can see the various elements of the comprehensive plan summarized here. You've got them specifically in your staff report as well. So I won't go through line by line and reiterate these. I think you've got that information before you. But I think the essence of it is the implementation of those policies in your comprehensive plan is reflected in your land development regulations with the conservation subdivision regulations. And so that's what we've tried to fit within the context of, and as Stephen summarized in his staff report, staff believes we have met those conditions. We're going to walk through those also with you now, and happy to answer any questions you might have. I think it's vitally important that we get this right. We've heard the concerns and questions about things like stormwater and protection of the creek, and we agree those are absolutely vital. So, it's important to get those right. We're happy to continue working with staff as we move through this process to ensure that continues to happen. So, as was previously covered in the staff report, this particular property has multiple layers of comprehensive plan, future land use regulation on it. The areas that we're proposing for actual development construction are within the ULI. That's your urban low intensity. That's the same land use classification that's in place on the areas that cover Spruce Creek Fly-In, for example. NARMA and the Environmental Systems Corridor, subset under NARMA cover primarily the coarse and riparian habitat protection zones surrounding Spruce Creek. Those are intended to preserve the ecological systems and preserve those natural habitats and pathways. This is also part of the EcoMap that was adopted after the Smart Growth Initiative in the mid-2000s. That is also the initiative, I believe, that was the trigger for the conservation subdivision regulations ultimately being developed. So this all really kind of ties together with the strategies that the county put in place, beginning with kind of that Smart Growth Initiative, and looking at how do we try and approach things from a better standpoint with regard to environmental protection, and allow things like clustering development and things of that nature. So just briefly, I just want to touch on this, and a lot of the comments and questions that I've seen, some of the things that I've seen on Facebook, some of the things that I've seen in correspondence and questions really starts to get into level of detail. I've seen a number of comments and questions about, well, how's the bridge going to be designed? How is what does the specific engineering look like? So I put this slide in just to kind of reiterate what's already been said and reiterate here what you already said, which is this is a multi-step process when you're going through this. We're at step one, the overall development plan. So the key things that we're looking at here, what is the layout? What does it look like from a conceptual standpoint? What's the density and intensity being proposed? Where are the access points? What's the configuration of the open space and the environmental constraints that need to be honored and followed and respected as we move through the process? The key thing here is it doesn't authorize any actual activity to occur. It simply allows you to go to the next step in the process, which is that preliminary plat process, where those engineering details and questions have to be provided. Where the specific design of the stormwater system, the bridge, the access, all of those things have to be provided. And typically we see coming out of that some of the conditions that I've also seen asked, in some of the comments and questions in the public. How do you guarantee that the bridge is going to be there? How do you guarantee that it's going to be designed appropriately or maintained appropriately? Those are the things that your process provides for to be addressed as we move from ODP into the preliminary plat stage, and then ultimately into the final plat stage where you're establishing lots that can then be transferred to third parties. So a quick kind of summary of the conservation subdivision review criteria. I think, and I'm going to go through these kind of point by point in a second, but I think the key thing, and I think this comes again out of that work that was done in the early 2000s, first and foremost, identify the things that have to be protected. Preservation of wetlands, habitat corridors, floodplains, significant uplands. Those were the things that when we ended up looking at the site, if Evans, our engineer, is here and available for questions as they may come up. But we started with what are those constraints, what are those areas of the property that we had to make sure that were being avoided and where impacts were being minimized to the extent that could be avoided. Then move into clustering. Look at the areas that your comp plan through the ULI designation specifies are more appropriate for a higher level of development that are not as constrained by the environmental factors, and shift the development footprint and patterns to those areas. Make sure that those permanent open space tracts are preserved, and that conservation easements and terminating development rights related to those properties are provided. That there's adequate access, utilities, drainage, and concurrency compliance. And then finally, that it's consistent with all applicable elements of the comprehensive plan. So moving into the specifics, conservation subdivisions are under your code, section 72547. And there's roughly 10 specific criteria that have to be looked at as we're going through the process to verify if a project complies with the requirements. But here's the general purpose and intent. As I said at the outset, this really is focused on some of the implementation of the Smart Growth Initiative from the early 2000s and the corresponding elements of the comprehensive plan that were adopted at that time to implement those strategies. So, as it states here, these regulations are set forth a flexible process for authorizing conservation subdivisions with innovative design and provide standards for and locational criteria to site lots in areas suitable for development. And establish the procedures for permanent conservation management of the county's natural resources. So, jumping in, the standards for conservation subdivision review are set forth in subsection C of that section. And again, it's 1 through 10. There's no minimum acreage established under the code for the subdivision. So again, we have, I lost my notes here, approximately 125 acre total site. So obviously, with there not being a minimum acreage, we have a appropriately sized property. Maximum of 600 residential dwelling units. Our proposal is 111 units, so we're all within that maximum. Your ODP materials, the specific plans that you have in your packet in materials before you include the specific lot dimensional criteria that are being proposed with regard to this project. So the criteria number 3 is satisfied with the materials that you have before you. The conservation management plan, this is something that we've already submitted an initial draft of that plan to staff. Environmental permitting has reviewed that draft and has signed off on the concepts of it. I do expect, and this is the experience I had with a couple of the other, I did work on the other 2 conservation subdivisions that have been approved by the county over the past 5 years. I think this is something that will continue to evolve a little bit. I think before you get to the end of your preliminary plat review process, there may be additional points that come up that are appropriately addressed in the conservation management plan. Preliminary draft of that has been submitted. It's been reviewed by your staff and found to be sufficient for where we are in this stage of the review process. Perimeter buffer that has an average depth of 100 feet with a minimum depth of 50. As staff already pointed out, we've got an average depth of, I believe, I think the maximum that they cited was 165. We actually have points where it gets out to 275 feet, particularly along the course of the creek. So we are satisfying the condition that minimums are 50, but our average throughout the entire proposed footprint is 100. And these are permitted in any zoning classification. As your report indicates, we've got multiple zoning classifications that apply to the property, A2, RR, and RC. So that is consistent with what was envisioned with the LBRs when you adopted 72-547. Going further, criteria 7, fill material within the floodplain may be allowed within upland areas that are identified for development on the overall development plan. Placement of fill should be limited to the building, driveway, and road areas. We have been hyper-focused on avoiding floodplain impacts with regard to the design. And so I think with the exception of where we've got the bridge landing coming in, there are 0 floodplain impacts proposed as part of the overall development plan. The development footprint is fully outside of your floodplain. Criteria number 8 really doesn't apply here. It really was set up more for if you were doing kind of the dirt road subdivision strategy or approach that was authorized by the prior code. We're not proposing new unpaved roads here, so I'll just kind of skip over that one. We are proposing that the roads be private within this, and that kind of tied into some of the questions over maintenance of both the roadways and maintenance of the overall bridge, something that we felt was better controlled and managed by the residents rather than putting that on the county as a whole. We do agree with the staff condition that there be some type of a more robust entity, whether that's a CDD or dependent district. We certainly think there's a couple of opportunities to pursue with regard to that can satisfy that criteria and make sure that there is a public-facing or public entity like a CDD, which operates as an independent special district and is a unit of government that is transparent and responsible for the maintenance of the bridge in particular, but the internal roadways as well. And so with regard to the requirements under subsection 9, we fully agree that each of the disclosures that the county requires would be appropriate with regard to moving forward. So criteria 10 is one of the areas where I think there's kind of a lot of the specific detail in your approval criteria. So the general requirement that you see in 10 is that the 60% of the property of the gross land area shall be designated as permanently protected open space, managed for either passive recreation, agriculture, conservation purposes, or floodplain management, and on which the underlying development rights have been severed. This section goes on to cite 3 separate components. So if you look at subsection A, these are, I think, relatively straightforward. It's your conservation area. We'll see when we get to the actual layout of the site. It's clear to see these are the conservation areas that, again, from the very beginning, we recognized the need to protect. Spruce Creek, the adjacent habitats, the adjacent wetland systems. And so these areas, and I think that's been consistently applied, across the other subdivisions that you've looked at and considered under this ordinance. The other component of that 60%, the other 2 components of that 60%, common open space. The open space that's set aside for passive recreational purposes may contain accessory buildings and improvements necessary and appropriate for recreational uses and public uses, as shown on the development plan, including areas for stormwater management. Septic drainage system designed to ensure compatibility with the environment. Again, this is, even though these areas have some level of improvement on them as contemplated in this section, it's another area that your code requires that the development rights on the parcel be severed and essentially deeded to the county as part of this process, and we recognize and agree with that. Finally, active agricultural areas. Any land that is continuing to be kept in agricultural use, subject to best management practices and everything else, can also be a component of that 60% requirement. The buildable area, the area that is being developed with the residential uses, the roads, the other things of that nature to provide access and development for the property, is limited to 40%. As your staff report details and as is shown on the materials in front of you with the OUP, we are at 62.6% on that first criteria for the open space and conservation areas, and 37.4%, sorry, my math was, on the criteria that is applicable here in number 11, which is the 40% or less. So again, we believe we comply with that, and the staff in their review has agreed that what we propose complies with that. You have under the this program, the Conservation Subdivision Program, the ability to have density bonuses also apply. The staff report indicates that if you went to the theoretical maximum of the land use classifications that apply to the property, I think we would have a maximum of somewhere around 203 residential units. We're just over half of that number that's being proposed, so we have not sought to apply any of the density bonuses that are also allowed under this section of the code. So that is one of the criteria, but it's not one that we're asking to be considered here. So one of the things that, I promise I'm getting closer to the end. One of the things that staff indicated is that we are asking for a couple of waivers at this point in time. And I think it's important to understand, why waivers and why are we asking for those where we are now if we're not yet into the specific detail. Primarily, it's because we need to understand what it is that we're moving forward with final design on. And so I'm going to walk through a couple of those waivers and try and explain in a little bit more detail. Some of them I've, again, seen some chatter with regard to what it is we're asking for, and that we're asking to not have to count trees that are being cut down and things of that nature. That's not entirely accurate, so I wanted to kind of walk through and give you detail on those, each and every one of those. So there are the summary of the 4 waiver requests that we have. One, to allow wetland impacts to 42,900 square feet of development of area for the development of residential lots. I'll talk about that in just a second. 2, to allow connecting to existing 60-foot right-of-way and existing pavement width of 20 feet. 3, to allow modification to the tree survey requirements for it to allow a statistical analysis for historic and specimen trees. I think this is the important part that has been missed in some of the comments that I've heard. Within the conservation areas. So we're not asking for this waiver to apply to any area that is proposed for development. This would only be applicable to the areas that are going into conservation or that are proposed for conservation, so that, again, it's a very densely forested area. And so since that area is being conserved and placed into those conservation restrictions, we believe that a statistical analysis of the tree count and the survey, the historic and specimen trees in that area would be appropriate. And finally, the removal of limitation that restricts construction to 20% of buildable lots per year. Again, since this is a clustered development that is proposing to be constructed in essentially one phase with the structure going in once, also the added benefit of that is limiting the duration of things like construction and traffic. This is a code section that I think oftentimes you see a request for on a waiver, and it simply allows us to plan from this point forward how that phasing will work as we get into the preliminary plan. So, as I said, just a little bit more detail. Waiver number 1 really relates to your code in the conservation subdivision section allows for road impact, again, discourages wetland impacts of any kind, but allows for road impacts as they relate to required infrastructure, things like road access. One of the constraints that we've worked with regard to the site is there's really one legal access point to it at this point in time. We've got a secondary access that comes out onto Russell Road in the southeast corner. But the primary access point that this property has, and that's whether it develops with the proposed conservation subdivision you see before you today, or any other future development that would require access to the site, it really is required to come by a bridge across from Creek Crossing Road in quite a place in the country. Based on the geometry of that, and looking at how that road needs to be designed and how to basically be able to come through there and limit more significant impacts to Spruce Creek and its systems, and the RHPZ, the proprietary habitat protection zone that applies to that. We are proposing to impact a lower quality wetland. That whole system is about 2.8 acres. In discussing kind of the nature of the impact on the roadway with staff, we really kind of reached the conclusion that impacting it with the road crossing was functionally going to impact that entire wetland area. And so based on that, we proposed that we would have some additional lots in that area, since again, that wetland system was being impacted. Interestingly, in the original versions of the plan, we actually had some additional lots that were on, if you look at this picture to the right of where you see the roadway coming in and the stormwater ponds were. After hearing some of the concerns from the flying community in particular, we pulled everything out of that area. That's the flight path on the end of the primary runway at Spruce Creek, and so we wanted to make sure we were limiting the placement of any homes in that area. And so you can kind of sort of see that on here, but we've got that flight path shown on the overall plan, and we've shifted residential use out from within that area. And so based on the fact that we were going to have significant impacts to that low-quality wetland. Okay. Our environmental consultant is here to talk to you specifically about that wetland building. Okay. I'm going to ask him to just give you a little bit of detail about that wetland system in particular. He provided us with a couple of pictures. Kind of generally characterize and introduce yourself.
My name is Bill Griffey with Ecological Consulting Solutions based out of Longwood, Florida. I'm the environmental consultant of record, and I did the wetland delineation on this property, so not only the wetlands in question, but all the other wetlands on the property. We have some photographs of the two wetland areas. The wetland in question, the waivers being requested for is 2.15 acres. It's a forested wetland, but it's dominated with a lot with slash pines. So we don't have a lot of the natives that were probably historically in there, like cypress trees. It's more dominated with pine. There was a historic remnant ditch that drained this wetland towards Spruce Creek. So the hydrology's been impacted. We consider it low quality, low function, no listed species in it, suppressed hydrology, and an influx of slash pine over the native community. And we are focused on this wetland to avoid Spruce Creek and all the RHPC riparian habitat protection zone to protect that area. We're looking at it, if we put a roads through the middle of it, when we talk about impacting the remainder of it, it's anticipated that the remaining portions of that wetland will no longer function long-term because it'll be bisected by a road. So in my experience with St. Johns River Water Management District and U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, they would take that same position as well. So that's why we're seeking the waiver for the entirety of the wetland. And I can answer any questions we have.
Let's go. And I did, you got a couple numbers in front of you. There's the 2.8 that's the overall impacts that are being proposed. There's the 2.15 that relates to this particular wetland system. And then your staff report asks for a waiver of 42,900 square feet. The reason that the staff report and that waiver request are worded the way that they are is because the code section that we're dealing with says creation of residential lots. And so it really, while there's a larger wetland area being impacted, the only thing that the waiver is required of your code to apply to is the area that's within those lots that are included in that impacted area. So just wanted to clarify that. As we're talking about this, I did want to also get Dave Evans to come up for a second. We had some questions that have been raised, over the past several months about whether or not this particular wetland system is a receiving body or receives any of the stormwater that comes out of the Spruce Creek flying community in particular. So David, can you speak to that?
Good morning, David Evans, Evans Engineering, 719 Irma Avenue, Orlando, 32803. Yes, we have been in constant communication with several folks, including the Spruce Creek Flying and certainly the county staff, relative to the drainage patterns on the property. As you know, a preliminary stormwater analysis was submitted to the county for the ODP, not normally done, but it was done based on the fact that we wanted to make sure that we were taking care of the perimeter inflows, outflows, and paying attention to the stormwater management system that we're proposing in this development. So when doing so, we looked at this particular wetland and we looked at the elevations relative to that. There's a very detailed topography that was done on the property. I think that's included in the site plans and the packages. You'll see both that and somewhat of a tree survey. And so at the point that we did that, we studied the pattern of this particular wetland, and we noticed that there was actually an outfall. And I think Mr. Griffey previously stated that it was drained in the previous state. So The outfall path from Spruce Creek Fly-In on the north end of the property, they call that outfall 7, actually comes out from pretty much a third of the way down from their property, just south of their runway we talked about earlier, and then flows north into Spruce Creek. This particular wetland is south of that and higher. So the elevation of the wetland is actually above the elevation of that outfall that leads to Spruce Creek. And so when we studied that and looked at how the outfall actually works from Spruce Creek Fly-In, we noticed that no water was getting to that wetland from Spruce Creek. However, it was flowing through a canal or ditch that runs from Spruce Creek and from the Fly-In to Spruce Creek. That particular system is being maintained in its current state, and actually there's some proposals on the table to maintain that ditch for them and turn it over in a conservation easement or an easement for maintenance of that ditch. So at the end of the day, the wetland doesn't receive water from Spruce Creek. The impact of the wetland won't have any effect on their outfall system from that north end, and be preserved. That outfall system will be preserved. Any other questions?
All right, thanks, Ed. Okay, so moving on to the second waiver request. This one really is a function of history. So if you look at, the waiver specifically is to allow connections to a 60-foot right-of-way versus the 70-foot. 70-foot is, with 24 feet of paved area is what the county's current standard is. This is a copy of the recorded plat for phase 1 of A Quiet Place in the Country. And as was noted at the outset of the meeting, the roads within A Quiet Place in the Country are public, county-maintained public roadways, and essentially provide the only public access, dedicated public access to the property that we're talking about. Again, we have a kind of prescriptive roadway with Russell Road on the southeast corner that is being proposed as a secondary emergency access, but the principal public access provided for this property is County Circle Drive to Creek Crossing Road, and this is the plat. At the time these roads were established, at the time the county accepted these roadways, your standard was different. You had a standard that required 60-foot right-of-way and more narrow pavement width. So these plats were approved, and the existing condition is the county's road network there is less. And that's not uncommon. You see that in a lot of places around the county where you've got an existing road network. It may not meet the current standard, but it met the standard at the time. Nonetheless, we can go through the review with staff. This is a required waiver for us to request. We don't obviously have the ability to acquire additional land, to acquire, widen roadways that are within your existing right-of-way. So this is one of those kind of secondary waiver requests that we had to submit. Waiver number 3. Again, I think there's been some concern. I think I saw the comment or some hyperbole that this waiver was seeking to clear thousands of historic and specimen trees without even counting them, and that's not the case. What this waiver specifically relates to, really is the areas that you see in green and kind of blue and magenta here, within the property footprint. It's the areas that are in your RC area that are covered by the Environmental Systems Corridor land use and the eco map. That are outside of what's being proposed for development. And so consideration of this, as staff detailed, the actual review and discussion of tree removal and tree mitigation, things of that nature occurs at your preliminary plat phase. But to know what we need to provide going into that phase, we're required to ask for this waiver now so that we can provide the statistical information for that area. Rather than going out and counting each of the individual trees that would qualify as historic or specimen. And then finally, I mentioned before, you have a code requirement that specifies that no more than 20% of the lots in any subdivision can be cleared and repaired in any given year. That is a provision that is commonly waived, I think, as you go through, because in recognition of the fact that installation of things like infrastructure and stormwater and roads and pipes and everything really have to occur on the whole when you're dealing with a project that has interconnected systems. So that's the fourth waiver that is requested for you. I want to just touch on this real quick. We have had some of our clients in the development team have had some ongoing conversations with representatives from the Spruce Creek Property Owners Association. This is the last kind of back and forth that I think we had with regard to some of the specific requests and the responses to those. One was that a navigation agreement be included in all the deeds and essentially put the folks that would be future residents of the neighborhood on notice that there's an there are active operations at the airport nearby. And so we've certainly agreed to do that. I think there was another project nearby recently that also agreed to put the similar disclosure in place. There was the added request here to restrict and limit the antennas in excess of 50 feet, and we've agreed, certainly we can do that. I'm going to show you a map in a second that relates to number 2, but in fact, it's probably just easier to kind of walk you through it. There's a lot of existing, and I think you're familiar with some of the past storm events we've had in the past several years. The level of flooding that occurred in areas that have primarily either no stormwater systems historically or systems that are designed to historic standards versus what your current standards are. And so there's been a lot of discussion between Mr. Evans and engineers working on behalf of the Property Owners Association about how to help with some of the existing conditions within the Fine community. And Dave, I'm going to pull you up here. If I misstate anything, just jump up and tap me on the shoulder or something. But this is kind of the map that our project engineer put together that kind of looks at what the existing stormwater system within the Fine community is and how that generally flows. And so, right now you've got kind of all these areas here that flow to this point. And we can circle there. But I think that's roughly it. That you've got all that stormwater within the Fine community that comes down to that point of discharge into Spruce Creek. And so that's not maintained. As far as we've been able to determine, there's no existing maintenance easement for the course of that discharge across the applicant property. So that's what the existing condition is. What we have had conversation about is trying to provide multiple paths. And now, obviously, there's other permits that are not related to this project. The Fine community has its own St. John's permits and things of that nature. So there are other permits that would be involved, but we've agreed that it's good to cooperate. And so we see multiple paths to provide them with some additional discharge opportunities. One would be that direction. Sorry, try that again. There you go. So we have a buffer that would be adjacent to the Flying community. Our proposal would be to incorporate plans in the preliminary plat that brings some of your LID standards in place here to use bioswales and things of that nature to provide connectivity. Down along here, you've got an existing wetland system that is represented by that green line that kind of receives a lot of that water. It kind of backs up into that system, but then pick up with an additional bioswale on this side, coming down to a culvert that ultimately comes down to the creek. It's not increasing the stormwater going to that area, it's just giving it multiple discharge points versus coming out in one location. The other opportunity that we've determined is there for that is kind of along the southern boundary. There's an existing ditch or canal there that we think can be improved. Our proposal has been we'll work with them to modify their permits to provide those additional discharge points and then provide the necessary easements for that drainage and for maintenance of those systems as well. Do that. Okay, jumping back. We talked a lot about the entry roadway. That's that 2.15 acre. There's another small fraction that's in the actual stormwater pond. We believe that relocating that access road will increase impacts to the systems along Spruce Creek, and I'll show you a graphic about that in a second. And we think that not only the county, but the Water Management District and others would prefer that you impact a lower quality isolated wetland than impacting part of the system or increasing impacts to the Spruce Creek system. So that's the request that was made, was relocate the roads so that we don't impact that wetland. We think if there has to be an impact, it's probably better there than on the systems that are directly associated with the creek. Information on the bridge, and this is one of the requests. We need it's the mystery bridge, right? We need information on what this design will look like, how it's going to be designed. What's been clear from staff at this level of detail in the ODP process is the bridge has to be designed so that it doesn't impact any flow or water flow through Spruce Creek. And essentially that it be spanned, that it would span, kind of both the creek and the RHPZ areas that are associated with the creek to minimize the footprint of any impact. But we're at ODP, so we don't have those full engineering details yet. That has to be designed and it has to be brought to the county for review and all the other agencies for review as part of the preliminary plan process. So we fully agree that this detail is required. We fully agree that it needs to be guaranteed and bonded and it has to be in place before any properties are sold within the proposed development, but that detail comes at the next step in the process. And so we fully agree to provide it and that we can't, and we acknowledge we can't exit that process without having that detail, including the maintenance end of the property. And then finally, the calculation of the area percentages within the conservation subdivision regulations. The suggestion's been made that because we're touching a tree or removing an area or modifying an area in any way, that area can count toward the 60% that's required under your code provision. But if you recall, going back to subsection 10, A, B, and C, there are 3 distinct areas that are identified that can comprise that 60%. It's conservation area, it's open space, and it's that active agricultural area. And so we've looked at it under that lens. Staff has reviewed under that lens, and we believe that everything complies with the requirements of 72-547 subsection C10. So that's one I think we just agree to disagree on at this point in time. I already talked through that. I'll stop and see if you have any questions. I did. Actually, I misspoke. Let me show you this, just because we brought it up. So this is relating to that redesign of the roadway. We have looked at what it does, and because we've got the turnaround requirement with the gate and other things, essentially it shifts more disruption into the area where the creek path and into that RHPZ area and into the wetland and kind of ESC areas of the property that we're otherwise trying to minimize those impacts to. And so I'll stop there and go back a slide and ask if you have any questions. I appreciate your time and patience this morning.
Thank you, Mr. Watts. You all have some questions?
Impacts to the wetland, obviously, you would have to go and get permits through St. John's, potentially U.S. Army Corps. Do you anticipate, because you're impacting those wetlands, the need to obtain wetland mitigation credits?
I'm going to bring Bill Griffith to speak to the permitting.
Yes, since it's over half an acre, we would be required to provide compensatory mitigation for St. John's. The current Army Corps definition of waters of the United States, we would not because it's an isolated wetland, but we would for St. John's.
So a wetland this close to Spruce Creek that you're saying is disconnected and would not require Army Corps permit?
Not for that wetland. We have to get an Army Corps permit for the bridge crossing, but that wetland being isolated, they don't have jurisdiction over isolated wetlands. They're not considered waters of the United States.
Okay, one other question. You initially said that you were proposing this development as a PUD. What would that process have looked like?
So PUD, principally it's like any other rezone. In the PUD process, you have to go through a similar staff review, and then that ultimately goes to the DRC for public hearing and also public hearing in the county council. We ultimately, and the reason for that is that you're asking for more rights than you currently have, or you're asking to change the rights that are associated with the property. I think based on the feedback we received, and we were proposing a higher number. We're proposing a higher number of units under that PUD approach initially. Based on the feedback we received, we determined that this property needs to live within the existing rights that it has. And so looking at the processes that you have in the land development regulations, the conservation subdivision process seemed to be the appropriate process, in particular, given the concerns raised with regard to Spruce Creek and its protection.
What would the process have been for requesting, would you have had to have requested a waiver for lot creation within a wetland in the PUD process, or would that have been just part of the overall approval?
That would have been part of the overall approval. That's specific to the conservation subdivision.
So that's specific, it's a specific requirement of conservation subdivision. That's all I got.
Thank you, sir. I do have a question. With regards to the allegation easement, is that for the entire community or just the proposed homes that are within the flat plan of the primary runway at Spruce Creek Drive?
It would be for the entire community. We removed any homes that would be within the direct flight path coming off the end of the runway, southwest end of the runway. So we removed any home sites or lots within that area just to avoid that concern. But the request was, and we're agreeable to having the allegation easement cover, all of the lots within the subdivision. It's an active airport. I live in DeLand. I see the formation squadrons that come out of Spruce Creek and fly over downtown on an almost weekend basis, every weekend. So I know there's a lot of activity there.
As an airport operator, that's a very important provision. So thank you.
Yeah, just one other quick question. You mentioned that the entrance road have to provide access to the property, and the allows for impacts to the wetlands for that access road. However, design of that road, including the bridge, still were subject to the county's minimal environmental standards for avoidance and minimization of wetland impacts, correct?
Correct.
Mr. Watts, I have a couple of questions. You mentioned the flight zone, and I'm not sure that's a requirement, I guess, for a public or a private community.
So, Chapter 333 of the Florida statutes requires us to set up airport restriction zones for public airports. So, we have airport overlays around public airports to land. We've got one for Ormond, New Smyrna, our airport. So that's a land development restriction. It does not apply to private airports. We're not required under the statute to have that airport overlay restriction from private airports. So it only applies to public airports.
Okay, I think that's what I thought. But you working with the adjacent person, you agreed to, because you had an up on there, I think you were going to
Yes,
build
that was a
units,
request
and then
that
you
came through
agreed
POA.
to move them.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, in fact, they provided, I think, a draft of one that they used recently, and we've reviewed that and adopted that draft with the addition of the intent restriction that was requested.
Okay, and then so now you're impacting some of the wetlands, I guess. With some of your units, you could have put units there, is what I'm saying.
Well, I would say that's a little distinct. So I think there's two separate things that were done. One, based on just feedback from neighborhood meetings and other discussions, there was concern about building anything directly under the flight path, departure path or runway path coming off the end of the runway. So we just moved those. That wasn't specifically part of the application agreement. In addition to that, there's a request to kind of provide this disclosure. You're moving in near an airport. We recognize that. You're not going to object to the operations that occur.
It does make sense. I appreciate that. And then as far as the wetland quality, is it Griffin?
Yes.
Slash pine, isolated wetland system, obviously the court's not going to take jurisdiction of it, St. John's is. Do you remember what that UMAM score of the existing wetland system is?
I can score it for you. I haven't scored it yet because I have not submitted to St. John's yet.
Okay.
So on average, I would give probably location, since we have development, I'd probably go 6. It's drain 5.5. So I put it around like a 0.53.
So kind of the medium low.
Yes, medium to low.
Low area, okay. And then once you got to provide access to the site, so then you're going to sever that, and then long-term, the drainage and that quality, location, landscape would be a lot lower.
It is, yes, and based on experience like this, St. John's will make us mitigate the entirety of the wetland. Even if we didn't have direct impacts on either side of the road, we would still mitigate for the entirety of it.
Do you know where the basin falls, where you would do mitigation?
There are multiple banks we could look into that, so we're going to do a lot of mitigation on site because we're required by St. John's, if we have riparian habitat protection impacts like the grid, we have to give that. So in other words, the agencies will want like for like, so we're not going to mitigate a marsh somewhere for a forest development. We want to provide like for like. So we'll find the closest bank, and we have to be in basin for St. John's, so it'll have to be an in-basin bank that we'll have to purchase mitigation credits from.
Appreciate that, thank you.
The determination on the scoring and the quality of the wetland is still subject to approval by
Correct.
St. John's?
Yes.
Okay.
And they will do a site visit and come inspect, so yes.
Any questions? No? Okay, so the next we'll hear from, thank you all. Next we're going to hear a presentation with the flying community, I think. Is that?
That's correct. So there has to be recognized as party leaders. We've agreed they have 20 minutes to present their expert. You can ask questions at any time and after their presentation.
Okay, thank you.
Good morning.
Good morning.
My name is Terrell Ryan. I'm an attorney, and I represent Spruce Creek Property Owners Association, which is, as you know, the association of landowners located in the flyover and directly next adjacent to this site. We're going to call 4 witnesses. Paul Holmes, who is the president of the POA, will speak first. Then Danny Lejeune, who is an expert in wetland science. Bruce Moya, PhD, who's an expert in engineering. And then Peter King, who's an expert in land use planning. And they're going to speak to, whether they believe this complies with land development codes. For the record, Spruce Creek Property Owners Association opposes the proposed development, and they'll present through their witnesses basis for the DRC not to approve this today. We're not asking that you deny it today. We're asking that they go back and they do some work on some additional points that we're going to raise. So let me now just call my witnesses. You should have copies of their reports. They've each done their own report. And so the details in the report, but given the time frame, we're just going to hit the high points. Thank you. The first witness is Paul Holmes.
First, did you get the exhibit A and B that I have here today? You should have small copies of that so you can look at it. That's great, thank you. Hi, I'm Paul Holmes. I'm president of Spruce Creek Property Owners Association. We come here representing 1,600 homes and businesses, and that is $2 billion worth of taxable property inside the Spruce Creek area. We also represent 3,000 voters for Volusia County. Thank you for letting us air our concerns. I previously requested 5 items from the county staff and Luxor, and I'm happy to say that item number 1 and 2 have already been discussed. We've worked with them. That's the aviation agreement with Swales. Thank you very much. They've been very professional and easy to work with in a lot of ways. Thank you. We still have 3 issues we need to talk about today. Item number 1, and this is the big one, this is 1A on your sheets. The wetland waiver for the homes and roads and pickleball courts should be denied. It's 2 acres, not the 3,300 square feet, of that is high-quality wetlands. The road needs to be angled to the south, as I've said before. Can we hold this up so everybody can see it? This road can simply go to the south. It's not going to impact the other lands in a negative way, but it will protect our wetlands. We're trying to protect the wetlands. Please refer to the Evans Drainage Pattern Exhibit, that's Exhibit B. It's Luxor's exhibit. They're here, they made this exhibit, and it clearly shows and states wetland W2B outfall leads directly to a tributary that connects to the Spruce Creek River. It's right there in blue, folks. It's plain as can be. It's their exhibit, and it shows this is not a ditch, as everybody likes to claim. It's a wetland tributary that leads to Spruce Creek, which is an outstanding Florida waterway. It's all connected. It's all one. Trying to claim it's a ditch and it's an isolated wetland is simply not true. You have it in front of you there today, and it's their exhibit. Very important. Right here at this podium, last year, it was Clay Irvin, Ray Tyner, that's your predecessor, in a Volusia County representation to the county where they went over the rules. This is his quote. This is Clay Irvin's quote. "Avoid the wetlands. That is the #1 priority." We have a good video on that. We've got a court reporter that's got it. We're going to submit it for evidence. Number 2, let's move on. The 40% buildable area issue. The plans are using 70 acres of buildable area, not the 46 as listed in your presentation today. The Conservation Development Agreement language clearly states at least 60% of the gross land area of the proposed subdivision shall be designated as permanently protected. That's right in your writing. Now, there are semantics about open areas, and we're going to these different sections, but listen, Luxor is trying to destroy approximately 3,000 trees in the northern sector to make 2 drainage ponds that are required for infrastructure. This is not a nice, pretty open area. They're wrecking the trees, and then they're going to claim that this qualifies toward the 60% conservation area. It doesn't pass the smell test. Everybody knows you can't wreck trees and then call it conservation area. You have to keep those trees there. If it doesn't fit, must not vote for it. Don't vote for it. Okay, number 3, the payment for the bridge must never fall on the Volusia County taxpayers. The bridge is being planned as a community development district, and should anything ever go wrong with this development, using a CDD, the cost of this private bridge would be passed on to the county taxpayers. These people here. That is, if it's not done right, the bill for a multi-million-dollar private bridge serving only approximately 100 homes will be forced on Volusia County taxpayers. Let's make sure that the developers, who are the only ones who benefit from a bridge, end up fully paying for that bridge. In summary, we are not against this development, but we are for smart development that follows the rules. We have corresponded with you, and we have made a lot of progress. We still have more work to do. Our team of professionals, right here, we've got 5 of us, are here ready to protect our interests, always ready. We have millions of dollars available to protect ourselves from unfair rulings and violations. This could go on for years. Please follow the rules, deny the wetland waiver, limit the development to 40%, and make sure this new development will pay for the bridge. Thank you. Once again, deny the wetland waiver. It's actually a waiver for a pickleball court.
Yes.
Thank you.
I would ask that Mr. Holmes's paper be introduced to the record. The next witness we will call is Danny Lejeune.
Good morning. My name is Danny Lejeune. I'm a consultant with Acre Psychological Services in St. Augustine, Florida. We're at 403 Anastasia Boulevard, St. Augustine 32080. So the applicant has applied for a waiver to impact a non-exempt 2.15 acre wetland known as 2B. This is for a road, pickleball court, and additional residential lots. This is in direct conflict with the Volusia County LDR section for conservation subdivisions, which states impacts to non-exempt wetlands, wetlands with an area equal or greater than 1/2 acre shall be limited to the minimum needed for stormwater, floodplain compensation, roadway, or utility crossings to connect upland development areas. Non-exempt wetlands may not be impacted for the purpose of establishing additional lots. In the application, impacts to the wetland from the road are being used to justify impacting the remaining wetland. This does not support the minimization design as stated in the waiver. All of the proposed wetland impact for the pickleball court, residential lots, road conflicts with the regulations for conservation subdivision. Nowhere in the application or waiver request is a detailed discussion of alternatives considered, alternative routing shown, or why they've been ruled out. The obvious alternative, as discussed, is shifting the road out of the wetland entirely, but still within the upland development area that they're already utilizing. Since the wetland is surrounded on 3 sides by uplands, crossing through the wetland is not required to access additional uplands, which is stated as a requirement for road crossings through non-exempt wetlands by rule. Additionally, the waiver states that wetland is degraded of average to low quality due to historic silviculture activities, altered vegetation structure, and limited ecological connectivity. Description does not provide adequate justification for deeming it average to low quality. Based on the property's location and size, it would not seem to be a suitable silviculture site. A review of aerials from 1995 to present did not reveal any obvious silviculture signatures of the landscape like rows of pine trees, which is typical on a silviculture site. Some clearing in the area wetland can be seen as recently as about 2020. If it was and continues to be disturbed by man-made actions, which are not exempted activities like silviculture, that would not provide sufficient justification for deeming it average low quality. If it was left undisturbed, the wetland would have time to recover over time. Thus, it should be evaluated as if no disturbance had occurred according to typical regulatory practices. Finally, the wetland boundaries, as we discussed, have not been approved by the St. Johns River Water Management District. As such, they're still subject to modification. In reviewing the site topography, like was just discussed, there's an apparent topographic connection between wetland 2B and what's identified as OSW1. This was not delineated in their delineation. This would provide a direct hydrologic connection to Spruce Creek through the other surface water, which probably would bring it under the jurisdiction of the Army Corps of Engineers. The potential hydrologic connection also elevates its value as a wetland, even if it's of average quality. All the 3 rationale provided for deeming this wetland average to low quality, they all require additional justification. In closing, the standard specified for granting of a waiver under LDR section 72501 states that without a waiver, an undue hardship would be created when the rules apply to a specific project or development. The applicant has not sufficiently justified how an undue hardship would be incurred within the waiver without the granting of this impact waiver. Therefore, it should not be granted.
Thank you. I would move his report into the record, please. Our next witness is Bruce Roya. He's our professional engineer.
Good morning, members of the board and staff. My name is Bruce Moya. Certified professional engineer in the state of Florida, over 30 years as president of MDB Engineering in Melbourne, Florida. I know you have our report, so I'll just hit the highlights as was stated earlier. Our first point was about the 40%. I think you can see that we have the exhibit that shows what we believe to be the non-buildable areas that would qualify for that 40%. We believe that they're actually at 56%, which we think is in violation of your code. My second point is on the bridge. That bridge is probably the single most expensive piece of infrastructure for this development, and the lack of detail that was provided on these plans is kind of amazing. It's a pretty important piece of this puzzle, and there was very, very, very little information on it. Another point is on the 100-year floodplain, because a lot of the setbacks and some of the configurations rely on that 100-year floodplain. It appears to us, and maybe the engineer could dispute this because I'm not actually 100% positive, but it appears to us that that is the FEMA designation of where that floodplain is. But since they have a full TOBO survey That would be more accurate, and that flood line should be at the elevations dictated on the topographic survey, not on the FEMA maps, because those are very general. So we're disputing the accuracy of that flood plan on the plan. On the stormwater report, just the Spruce Creek subdivision alone, development alone, is almost 3 times the basin size of this development, and it was completely ignored in the submittal that was made to the county. Just until recently did we receive this sketch of even acknowledging that they have off-site contributing areas flowing through their site and saying they will accommodate our outfall. It doesn't include any other off-site areas that I suspect from the south might also be flowing through their property. So I think, we do a lot of these developments. I've been doing them for over almost 40 years. We always look at the big picture. We always would show the county what is the size of our overall basin map. And that was never provided to the county until that, and that's only a partial exhibit that was provided. The wetland as well, since we do these types of projects, always subject to the St. John's coming out, and rarely do they agree with the consultant exactly. They're asking for a waiver down to the square foot. If just St. John's moves those flags at all, their waiver almost becomes void because it's not going to be at the area that they thought it was. And the fact that it is hydraulically connected to the Spruce Creek, as definitely shown on their typical survey, that is not an isolated wetland. And I would be surprised if that wetland delineation does not grow significantly when the St. John's and the Army Corps gets out there. On their stormwater report specifically, or kind of generally, it appears that they are using and I'm sure this was probably done a while ago, the criteria changed for water quality back in December of last year. The report that you have is not based on that new criteria, so it's not accurate. The water quality system, treatment requirements are different and more extensive, so they're not included in the report that you have. And that's really all the points that I wanted to make today. Thank you for your time.
Move his report into the record, and the next witness to call is Peter King, his land use plan.
Hello, Peter King, 404 West 70th Street, Jacksonville, Florida, representing Spruce Creek Property Owner Association through council. My background, I've been an AICP planner for about 27 years. I worked as a planner for the military, city, county government, and engineering companies. Now I have my own planning and land development company. I'm here to discuss the Creek Crossing Conservation Subdivision being proposed in accordance with smart growth initiatives contained in the Volusia County Comp Plan. I think this section of the comp plan is extraordinarily well written. I have to compliment the county for it. I think one of the biggest issues, though, is divergence between what the applicant is considering open space and conservation, or development, I should say, and what is actually development and what's not development. If you go to, I know I'm running out of time here, so I'm going to try to move through this quickly. I'm going to be specific. Comp plan section SG 1.2.2 says conservation developments of residential and open space developments where at least 60% shall be designated as permanently protected open space and managed for agricultural conservation purposes. It says development shall not exceed 40% of the land area. Development, capital D, shall not exceed 40% of the land area. Then it goes through 7 specific items that shall do. Protect natural and historic resources. I would submit that clearing the land for retention areas of trees and excavating those areas is not protecting natural and historic resources. Nor does it preserve the rural character of the county. Nor does it retain the functional open space for passive recreational uses, nor does it maintain significant areas for silviculture, agricultural production. nor would it provide habitat corridors, nor would it protect scenic vistas of the county. And number 7, this one's the most important, it would allowing smaller lots on compact footprints in order to protect more open space. Or if you're using the applicant's interpretation of what open space is, then it actually reads allowing smaller lots and a compact footprint in order to build more detention areas. So when you have a paradox or contradiction like that, you know your interpretation of the code is not correct. I'm down to my final minute, so I'm going to wrap it up. I'm going to forego talking about the rest of the comp plan, but it's just more of the same of what I said. Again, that's a very good section of the comp plan that the county has written. I'll move to the development code. If you recall, I earlier said that we cannot develop more than 40% of the land area. Go to the land development code. Development, this is the definition, any man-made change to an improved or unimproved real estate, including but not limited to building, structures, mining, dredging, filling, grading, paving, excavating, that has 6 specifics. And number 6 is clearing of land as an adjunct of construction. Well, that's what building a retention pond is. They've taken up all the trees and they're digging a big hole so that their stormwater can go into it. Those ponds would not be required if those houses are not being built and the pickleball courts are not being built. So in conclusion, by the county's own definition, the retention areas and ball courts do not possibly be undeveloped. And that's it.
We asked that Peter King's report be introduced. It's more detail on what he spoke. So let me just conclude. Spruce Creek POA submits that the DRC should not approve the proposed development order today because it's not consistent with the county's LDRs as set forth in our reports and the issues we've highlighted. We ask that the DRC require the applicant to redesign the bridge and the entrance road to avoid going through wetland 2B, which is hydrologically connected to Spruce Creek as demonstrated by their own application and materials and shown by our scientists, wetland scientists and engineers. We ask that the DRC require the applicant to respond to some of the concerns raised by our professional engineer on the stormwater system before this moves on. And we ask that the DRC require that the site be redesigned to meet the 60% open space requirement for conservation subdivisions in the LDC as outlined by Peter King. And finally, obviously our clients are concerned about the bridge, the detail of the bridge, and also the potential future costs and expense for maintenance for the public. Thank you.
Now the applicant now.
No, go to public comment.
Go to public comment. Okay, so folks, we're gonna go to public comment and we will have, you're welcome, we'll have 3 minutes per person. And the first person I have is Philip Steams, followed by John Hametry.
My name is Philip Stearns. I live at 3705 Lacey Lane, New Smyrna Beach. I'll read this prepared statement. According to the 2024 data from the National Transportation and Research nonprofit TIPS, building a bridge like this, one proposed, is estimated to generate construction traffic of 40 to 150 additional trips per day. This is just for the bridge and does not include infrastructure or home building crews. Russell Road that leads into Charles Street is noted in the proposal plan as a secondary access. It will be the only road of egress for 3 years of building construction of the bridge, as well as other infrastructure and home construction. This is one of the rural roads of only 20 feet of pavement, little shoulder, and no sidewalks based on the statewide crash patterns. These roads create a perfect storm of risk. Pedestrians must walk in the traveled lanes or on soft, unpaved edges, often facing fast-moving traffic. Bicyclists must share the road despite the threat of overtaking collisions. Dawn to dusk visibility is poor, adding to the risk. According to the FDOT crash fact established May 2025, 43% of serious pedestrian and bicycle crashes occur in daylight hours. Russell Road, Charles Street will become more dangerous if this development is approved. Our residents' safety will be traded for expensive bridge and few houses. But if this project is to be approved, Volusia County must factor in the cost of improvement of the road. Charles Street and Russell Road must be able to support this construction traffic. The integrity is failing and needs repaving. It needs improved signage, lighting, better over and side clearance of foliage and poles. We need to ensure that the residents have enough shoulder if they need to use it. And most important, we need a crosswalk at Airport Road for our pedestrians and bicyclists who cross safely to school, work, and shopping. Thank you very much.
John?
I pass.
Brian White, followed by Kevin Margarita. Brian?
Good morning. My name is Brian White. I'm a New Smyrna Beach resident, but also a property owner adjacent to Spruce Creek. I want to focus on one issue, and it's a dispositive one. This board should not approve this application without clear affirmative proof that it complies with outstanding Florida water standards for Spruce Creek. And importantly, the applicant's own record confirms that proof does not yet exist. The stormwater analysis presented is described as preliminary, the design is described as conceptual, and the final analysis is explicitly deferred to a later stage. This isn't speculation, it's the applicant's own materials showing the work has not yet been done. And this isn't a disagreement with the applicant, this is the applicant's own record telling you that the analysis isn't complete yet. You're being asked to approve a project today based on an analysis that doesn't yet exist. And the applicant's own materials confirm that stormwater will be discharged directly into Spruce Creek. So this is not indirect or a theoretical impact. This is direct discharge into an outstanding Florida water. Under Florida law, the standard is clear. No lowering of existing water quality is allowed, period. That is not discretionary. It's not something that can be deferred to a later time. It must be demonstrated before approval can happen. So the burden is clear. The applicant must demonstrate with competent and substantial evidence that their discharge will result in zero degradation of water quality. And that showing is not here. And instead, what we have is a conceptual stormwater design with deferred analysis, key infrastructure that is not fully designed, and commitments to address compliance later. That's not a sufficient basis for approval. And there's precedent here. In matters involving the Spruce Creek interchange, approvals were challenged even where impacts were to a ditch that was connected to Spruce Creek. Here, the applicant proposes a direct discharge into the creek itself. So the standard is not lower here, it's higher, which makes the absence of a completed analysis even more significant. At the same time, designing a system that actually meets OFW standards is not a minor detail. It can change stormwater system design, developable acreage, the overall feasibility of the project itself, which means this is not something that can be resolved later without fundamentally changing what is being approved today. So the question before this board is simple. How can you approve a project with a direct discharge into an OFW water body when the required analysis to prove no degradation has not been completed. You can't. Approval must be based on evidence in the record, not future studies, not conceptual designs, and not assumptions. If the analysis is not complete, that finding cannot be made, and if the finding cannot be made, approval should not happen. Thank you.
Kevin, I probably don't have your last name right. You go, okay. Okay, Mike Ponikoski?
Yes, sir.
Followed by Gary Singleton.
Good morning. Mike Panikowski, Smoke Farms Village. A waiver is a voluntary intentional relinquishment of a known legal right, claim, or privilege to release another party from liability. If approved, Volusia County staff is agreeing to not enforce our legal rights in favor of developer's plan, to build in a way that violates our current laws and regulations in place to protect our environment and our community from sprawl. If the plan didn't violate these rules, why would we need so many of the waivers? If you're going to waive them, why do we have these regulations in the first place? We talked about the maximum buildable lots waiver. We talked about the public streets right-of-way with waiver. There's also a public street with private bridge waiver requested to construct about a 2,000-foot HOA maintained bridge crossing Spruce Creek at a cost of about $10 to $15 million. That's a big nut for the homeowners to carry. If they can't carry it, who does? The taxpayers. The tree waiver allows the developer to conduct a statistical analysis of 5 sample lots out of about a 5,445,000 square foot property, which requires only a 50,000 square foot survey, which is really not sufficient. The wetlands impact waiver allows for the destruction of close to 3 acres of wetlands for a bridge landing, 10 additional homes, and a pickleball court. Your survey says that there is no standing water on the site. Well, we've been in the driest late winter and early spring the past 132 years. While dry today, our wetlands are like your kitchen sink or bathtub. They not always hold water, but when they do, they take what we give it and they put it where it needs to go. This land meets the Florida state statute of a wetland, no doubt about it. You can look it up. The historic and specimen tree waiver allows for the culling of trees that have been on the site for more years than most of us have been on this earth. Their fate, again, decided by a statistical analysis. Where traffic impact is concerned, the proposed development will generate 1,285 trips by their report, more than the 15 per day today on Creek Crossing Road. Let me leave you with these thoughts. We are losing so much of nature. Our bet for being on this planet should be to take care of it before it's gone. If you want to know the health of the creek, the wetlands, just linger for a moment in nature, watch and listen. The birds will tell you the health of the planet by their presence and their song. Listen to the rhythms of the natural world, its natural white noise. When someone steals something from us, they take what doesn't belong to them. If we keep stealing from nature, the inevitable is going to happen. We will lose so much of it, no one will notice, but by then it will be too late. Nature gives us clean water, fresh, rich air to breathe, everything we need to sustain life. If we can just show people the beauty of nature, perhaps they will fall in love with it, and we can slow its destruction down. For a moment, stand among the wood, close your eyes, listen, smell, and feel. Then open your eyes and superimpose a bridge, roads, homes, and a pickleball court. You must deny this application. Thank you.
Followed by Jan Albert.
My name is Gary Singleton. I'm a resident of Volusia County, and I live within half a mile of Spruce Creek. What is the purpose of this hearing today? Is it to ensure the applicant has complied with all of the statutes, ordinances, codes, plans, and requirements, or is it to bend, break, and ignore any rule that would prevent this developer from getting approval of the project? Does the owner have the right to develop this property? It means violating the comprehensive plan, which includes the Tomoka Falls Village local plan. Does include the right to destroy the quality of life and ruin property values of an entire existing neighborhood. Does the developer have the right to build a bridge that neither they nor future homeowners can afford, passing the cost of construction and maintenance on to Volusia County taxpayers? to expect Volusia County taxpayers to cover the cost of road improvements to handle a massive increase in vehicle traffic routed through this existing protected neighborhood? Does the developer have the right to develop this property even though they are unable to comply with the necessary requirements of a conservation subdivision? All because a developer thinks he can make a profit selling medium-sized homes on a small lot off the end of an airstrip with aircraft taking off at full throttle 100 feet over their rooftops for $800,000 to $1.5 million with the additional debt service of $5,800 per household per year just for the bridge alone. This development does not comply with the Tomoka Farms Village local plan. It does not comply with the requirements of a conservation subdivision without waivers, which can only be granted in the public interest. The builder has not demonstrated that he and the future owners can afford to build and maintain a 2,000-foot, $10 million steel bridge. We as citizens should not have to take our government to court in order to comply with your own comprehensive plan or enforce the written requirements contained in the applicable codes and ordinances. This property is on the bank of Spruce Creek, a natural stormwater system that tens of thousands of homeowners rely on to carry stormwater past their homes, not into them. It is inaccessible except for a development, except for the destruction of essential wetlands and thousands of old-growth trees. What we are asking today is that simply do your job, enforce all of the existing applicable rules, and deny this application.
Following Ms. Albert would be Stephen Blair.
Jan Albert, Country Circle Drive East, along the creek, and an appraiser and hydrologist for 54 years. So regarding the Tomoka Farms local plan, widening the road is not consistent with the plan, and it should not be done with a waiver, so that type of thing would have to go before the council. But regarding the wetlands, this is the most important wetlands in the entire basin that you're talking about having to build into, and you just spent $403,000 for a basin study that you haven't even looked at yet, and the plan will impact. Right now, I would say that there's still about 60% of the debris from the hurricanes stuck at the main meander point, which is right there at Tributary 2. Then, as far as the stormwater, removing the thousands of trees, whether they be softwoods, hardwoods, it's an interconnected living organism which impacts the heritage trees, will increase storm runoff by a huge margin, such that for every 4-inch rain, you're not going to be able to, you're going to have about 200 million gallons in the creek directly that you cannot keep on that site. And we had 8 of those last year, which is typical. And that is in violation of Chapter 50 and House Bill 403. Then to the cost, as everyone has mentioned, I have a couple of estimates of 15 million. So you're talking about a very large, having a community development district of such a small number of people, not going to be able to maintain this infrastructure. And in addition, the building of this project is going to impact all the infrastructure to the east of Tomoka Farms Road, because you're moving the recharge point. I've looked at thousands of properties across the US, Canada, and Western Europe, and I've never seen a property where the single hydrological key is on a single parcel like this one. And if you remove all of this, you're going to move the recharge point to the west, which will create many times a year flooding of their other infrastructure. So in addition to the tax increase from this project and bridge, you're going to have the residents have to pay for all the other damage to the infrastructure. The people of Southeast Volusia have got to fight to save this protected resource, federally and state protected resource, and outstanding Florida water body. Thank you.
followed by Rita, looks like, R-E-D-D-A.
Good morning. Thank you for hearing us and thank you for this time. I'm a resident in quite a place in the country, 315 Country Circle Drive. And again, my name's Stephen there. I flooded during Ian, the basin place that they had mentioned that they would redirect water that would literally flow right into my backyard. We had the Ian, I think we had like 26 inches of rain, and I had come into the water in my house. And so the concern obviously as a property owner, an existing property owner, is this floodway with water is one of my concerns. And I appreciate that y'all's job is to help protect us as residents and protect our property and do what's best for the county. And then second is I got kids that skateboarded and ride bicycles through this neighborhood, and that to double our, or we've got 200 homes about, and add 100 homes of people, traffic. We've got narrow roads. These roads are narrow, they're old. During the other hurricane, Milton, the road caved in. So our roads are narrow, and people ride their bikes, they ride their horses, they ride their four-wheelers. It's a quiet place in the country. And this is degrading our property value as well as our safety for, I witnessed on, June 12, 2025, a dump truck run into an automobile right there on Smoka Farms Road, coming out of Quiet Place, and just all that traffic down 415, adding all these vehicles coming in and turning in is going to create more traffic accidents. There's quite a bit of volume of people stopping on a road where people are trying to go 55 miles an hour. It just doesn't seem like a good access point to come through our neighborhood. If they can come out where there's a good access point, which is adding to our neighborhood volume for somebody else's benefit, it just feels like a violation of our rights. So I'm just going to leave you with 1 Corinthians 10:23. I have the right to do anything, right? We have the right to do anything, they say, but not everything is beneficial. So we appreciate that you would consider not allowing the waivers to that little creek crossing road. I know 3 people that have children on that road that ride their bicycles, and you're going to add 110 houses. That's a lot of volume on a road that these people spent, $800,000 plus for a house, to then now have to not allow their kids to ride bikes because it's no longer safe. Thank you.
Followed by Daniel Juwan. Sorry if I'm ruining all your last names. I'm just trying to read this.
That's okay. I'm Maureen Letta at 1978 South Creek Boulevard in Port Ridge, Florida. That's where I am. Okay. So I have 3 minutes to talk, right? Thank you for being here. Thank you, staff, for being here too. And I'm going to use only about 1 minute. I think you've already decided how you're going to vote. You may have to listen to the people here, but trust me, there are many, many more people that feel the way we do. And they don't want to go through this proposal still being worked on by the developers, as we've all heard, including the county staff heard that as well. Luxor decided to review this former PUD, as Ben Bartlett asked about, and now it's a current subdivision, with the county staff. Smart they are, it's conceptual though, still being worked on. And waivers, I think that Mike answered that beautifully. I think, Mike, what's the point? What's the point of laws if you get waivers all the time? They want 4 waivers, and they talked about the 4 waivers. The waivers and the wetlands are the most important part of it. Identify the trees. Normally number 4 is always waived, asking for 4 more waivers. The community taxpayers do not benefit from this. I encourage the DRC to deny the application. If you really listen to the people, not only here, but all the people that weren't able to come this morning, you'll deny this application and you won't put it through to the PLDRC. Thank you very much.
Danielle? I can't see the last name. Nancy Hall?
Good morning, I'm Nancy Hall. I thank you for hearing me. I live at 1951 Spruce Creek Circle North. My property borders on the creek, and I'm just directly north of Quiet Place. This whole idea of creek crossing is mind-boggling. I don't have anything prepared for you, but I'm speaking to you as a homeowner. My home was built by my family in 1980. We used to walk along the creek. We used to walk in that entire area. Because of development and continued destruction of wetlands and things back in those times, that area stays perpetually wet and flooded. I've lost pieces of my property due to continual flooding just from rainstorms. That's besides the point. They tacked on this word of conservation to the title, like it's something to be, it should be honored, but it's not. This is a travesty what they're proposing to this entire area. We all know as responsible homeowners, as responsible Volusia County citizens, that when we destroy wetlands, when we destroy property that is habitable by wildlife, I watch deer and raccoons and bobcat and beaver come out onto my property on a weekly basis. They put these developments in, they fence them off because people don't want to have anybody who's not supposed to be there come onto their property. That destroys and disrupts all kinds of systems. I'm asking that this council deny this, this proposal. It is nothing but a destruction for this entire area. We have a responsibility as Volusia County citizens to protect our area, and that's what I think you're seeing here as citizens standing up and saying, this is not good for this area. To put in 110 homes, and excuse me, a pickleball court, what a slap in the face to come and play pickleball on my property. I have acres. They're welcome to come and play pickleball. This is a slap in the face to this entire area. And that's all I'm asking, is that we use common sense. My mom used to teach me, just because you can do it doesn't make it right. I'm asking you to do the right thing. Don't progress this plan down the stream, because once you open this gate and say, yes, we'll consider it, it is done. You know that, and I know that, and every single person in here in this room knows that. You open this gate, we're done. Thank you for hearing me. Thank you for allowing me to be compassionate and passionate up here. I'm asking you to do the same thing. Thank you.
Peter King?
He's already testified.
Okay. Do we have any more questions?
Yes.
Terry Martin?
Good morning. My name is Terry Merkley. I'm a resident of Spruce Creek. It's clear to everyone involved in this community development that the proposed creek crossing development is not financially feasible because of its environmental issues and the need to construct a large bridge currently estimated by the developers to be 1,000 foot long. The bridge alone will take 3 years of work at the county, state, and federal levels to gain permits. And then $10 million for the cost of the bridge is estimated by the developer. The developer has decided to pass this expense on to future owners of lots via the creation of a community development district, a CDD. A bond issue for this development, seen by bond buyers as a low risk, might be obtained with a 5% interest rate and a 30-year payback. That would be the most favorable credit terms for a new development. Assuming these terms, the annual debt service would be $650,000 a year, or $5,900 per lot on 111 lots. Just for the bridge itself. Once formed the CBD, they could also issue another bond, theoretically, for roads, utilities, and development costs. However, the bridge payment alone would be more than the county tax on a finished home lot in this development. There's a risk to the property values of the surrounding communities. If the CBD goes bankrupt, as has happened many times in Florida in the 2006-2010 time span, these communities run the danger of having a partially completed bridge to nowhere, ruining the ambience of the community and becoming a potential hazardous and attractive nuisance to children and others in the surrounding area. To protect the future of the homeowners and the values of the surrounding properties, the following conditions must be included by the Board of County Commissioners in the establishment of a creek crossing CBD. Number one, developers must carry payment insurance on the bonds until all lots are sold. Number two, final approval of the subdivision must not be granted until bridge construction plans have been approved by county, state, and federal governing agencies. And three, most importantly, what is the overall riding public good that this is being accomplished by this impractical project? Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Christine Cunningham, followed by Jessica Sutters.
Hi, thank you for having us. I'm representing the Sierra Club of Volusia Flagler. And we keep using trigger words and words that are going to bring warm and fuzzy feelings, and one of those are a heritage tree. Heritage tree is an irreplaceable, that is the operative word, living asset that combines ecological, historical, cultural, and aesthetic value, warranting protection and careful stewardship for the benefit of present and future generations. We take them down, there's no mitigation. You can't replace nature. It doesn't happen. So we really need to focus on, if this were to go forward, protecting those trees. Future generations. I haven't heard yet that the flood zone for 2060, the year 2060, my grandchildren, is going to be 2.17 feet more than it is now. They're at the level of 2.17 feet. I only have looked at the NOAA picture. This is where we are. That red is the flood zone currently. It ends where you want to build this new development. When that's taken into consideration, the water will continue to flow. In 2060, you're going to have to figure out where you're going to put those houses, and you're going to have to move them because they're not going to be livable. And that's not that far in the future. I may not be here, but some of these people will, and how are you going to move 111 houses? Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Next will be John Piergott.
Hello, Jessica Shimshak, 3296 Spruce Creek Glen. My house butts up right to where the properties will be built. And our house was the last one on the street to be built in 95. So had the highest elevation. Anyways, behind my house, obviously the woods, but on the other side, there's a lake there which connects to a stream, and animals go through that path on a regular basis. I'm not talking about just one or two. I'm talking about a giant flock of turkeys, and a herd of deer, gulper tortoises, and gators, amongst other things. So that path will be blocked once it's built up. And this property that they'll be conserving technically won't be accessible by said animals that it would be conserved for. And also, there had already been some tragedies, environmental complaints done on the property in the past where the owner may have altered some wetlands without permission, let's just say. The earliest context I could find was about 2019, February. Yeah, and technically there was another owner before him who we bought it from in 2018, which said company that owned it before him went foreclosed. So long story short, that forest was where me and my friend and my brother, we would go fishing. And I remember seeing it differently before all the alterations had been done. And I remember when I woke up abruptly one morning to hear them chopping down trees in there, just so they could get their machine in there to do their giant whole water test. The soil samples. I won't admit, it just, every time I hear a noise, I get scared. If not for me, please, for the animals. Thank you.
Thank you. Followed by Catherine Ponte.
My name is John Burchett. Good morning to everybody. I live in Country Circle Drive East, a quiet place in the country, and I'm a Vietnam veteran. I built my home nearly 50 years ago in 1979 because I wanted to be in a rural setting. I chose a property with rural residential zoning for a reason. I never dreamed my zoning would change to accommodate one guy. I never flooded before 2022 with the hurricanes, but now all that debris is still in the creek behind my house from Milton and Ian. It floods with regular thunderstorms. 2 to 5 inches is all it takes to flood. I do not want to see thousands of old trees get knocked down behind my house, as it will only make the flooding worse. The fill dirt required to build these homes will do nothing but flood our subdivision. I also do not want to deal with the huge increase in traffic, our gigantic bridge. In addition, 111 homes would be a nightmare for both flooding and traffic. I do not want to live in Fort Lauderdale. I want to live here on my property that I've had since 1979. I ask you not to destroy 52-year-old subdivision with these 111 homes. Please do not allow this invasion of my property and my home. Now, the applicant showed infrastructure for the fly-in for drainage. He called Spruce Creek behind my house a ditch. These are some of the pictures that for the ditch behind my house, which is platted as Spruce Creek. There's one picture that's sideways here, that's losing her feet. Losing her feet, and then there's the back side is our home. That's taken from my back door. That's water all the way up to my back door, and you can see my lawn. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Sophia Marsh.
Good morning, Commission. Catherine Panthay, Slope Grove, Volusia. I'm speaking in opposition to the proposed creek crossing development along Spruce Creek. This project seeks to place over 100 new homes on land that is currently zoned for rural residential, agricultural, and resource corridor uses. Instead of following existing rules, the developer is asking you to rezone the property as a conservation subdivision. This is a clever attempt to circumvent the current zoning protections in order to increase density and boost their profits. Zoning changes are not a right. They should never be granted simply because the developer wants more houses on land to increase their bottom line. They certainly should not be approved when they come at the expense of established older neighborhoods, when they harm wetlands, or when they further compromise our already stressed waterways like Spruce Creek. We have seen this story too many times in Volusia County. Longtime neighborhoods, Spruce Creek Fly-In to Tobacco Farms Village, a quiet place in the country, and others are already struggling with flooding. These are families who have lived here for decades in homes never designed for today's increased runoff. Adding this higher density development will only compound the problem, sending more stormwater into streets, yards, and homes. Zoning changes are not a right, again, and should only be granted when they clearly benefit the entire community and do not further harm our neighborhoods or the environment. This project fails that test. I urge you to deny this rezoning request as well as the waivers necessary to move forward with the project. It should be noted that the proposed project is not consistent with the comprehensive plan unless multiple waivers are granted. Another thing to consider is under stormwater. Conceptual stormwater design appears to be acceptable for ODP approval. The appearance of being acceptable is not acceptable. How can anyone vote in approval in light of all the flooding our communities have suffered because of irresponsible development? Smart growth in this climate doesn't exist anymore, and an environmental consultant who claims a wetland is low-quality wetland is just greenwashing for his developer client. Today is Global Pay It Forward Day. You have a choice to make, and I request you pay it forward by protecting Volusia County's existing residents, our wetlands, and our waterways. Our community deserves to be protected over profit.
Yes.
Thank you.
Good morning, Commissioner and staff. I'm Sophie Marsh, Secretary of the Spruce Creek Fly-In Board of Directors. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today. Creek Crossing is being presented as a conservation development, yet it directly conflicts with both the spirit and the letter of protections our council has put in place. Spruce Creek is in an outstanding Florida waterway, as we've heard, a designation reserved for waterways worthy of the highest level of protection. Development near these waters should meet the strictest standards and not seek exceptions. Second, this property lies within the ECO, which exists to protect wetlands and environmentally sensitive lands in Volusia County. Despite this, the applicant is proposing the destruction of over 2 acres of wetlands, not as a last resort, but to place the entry road in a location to create more building lots. Even more concerning, the applicant is asking for a waiver to allow that impact, ignoring the code's directive to avoid wetland impacts for the creation of new residential lots. In addition, the requested multiple waivers to the tree survey requirements, stating a very high tree density, which would be too impractical to count. In their plan, they want to remove thousands of trees on the property all at once, not at 20% per year rate. Where do all the wildlife and gopher tortoises and all the animals that live there go when their habitat is destroyed all at once? A conservation subdivision requires 60% of the land to remain as open space for conservation, allowing 40% of the land to be developed. What I'm deeply concerned about here is the applicant is counting stormwater retention ponds toward that conservation requirement. These are areas that require clear cutting of trees, excavating the natural habitat, and fundamentally altering the landscape and the habitat corridors. That is not preserving natural areas. That is engineered infrastructure. Volusia County Ordinance 2019-6, Section 11, states the buildable area to support the residential and neighborhood convenience development shall not exceed 40% of the gross land area. A retention pond does not function as an intact habitat. It doesn't replace wetlands, and it doesn't provide the same ecological value as undisturbed land. Retention areas support the residential and neighborhood and should be included in the buildable area. If these stormwater systems and pickleball courts can be counted toward conservation open space, then the entire purpose of requiring 60% of preservation is undermined. It creates a loophole where development is simply being relabeled as conservation. And it makes me question, is conservation land truly being preserved, or is it being redefined to make this project fit the code? Placing the pickleball court directly over the wetlands, which is an impervious surface, it doesn't absorb, filter, or protect water like the wetland does. It's a contradiction, not conservation. So I'm asking you that decisions like this over time will erode the very protections that residents rely on to safeguard our water quality, manage flooding, and preserve our natural areas of Volusia County. Please provide a plan that will fully avoid wetland impacts. Thank you so much.
Lopez will be.
Good morning. And thank you for your time today. Thank you to all the community members that have made time to be here. I'm a resident of Woodside at Spruce Creek. I live on Whisper Wood Way, directly adjacent to the property that's being discussed, actually directly adjacent to the wetland of the pickleball court. And I'd like to talk about those proposed pickleball courts. I'd like to point out that there's no mention of the pickleball courts in the DRC packet, including the waiver number 1 that was submitted. Stephen did mention that as an amenity during his summary, but however it was not in there previously. Those pickleball courts are proposed to be built on top of the wetlands, as we've discussed. That's wetland number 2B. And the very nice pictures that Mr. Griffey supplied were great pictures of the drought-land, wetlands. This year is the 17th driest year out of the last 132 for this area. Volusia County is in 75% of Volusia County is in an extreme drought. We're down 4.54 inches of rain from the normal. So of course those pictures are going to show a nice dry looking prairie area, which is normally wet. I've flown over that area multiple times. I've seen the edges of the property and the tributary from my backyard during hurricanes and big storms, and it is definitely not dry. You could drive a boat down that area, that ditch. It's not a ditch. Also, the pickleball courts are approximately 15,000 additional square feet of impervious surface. That's roughly equal to 3 house lots. In addition to the wetlands, there's the pickleball noise lawsuits that are rising across the United States due to the high-pitched pop of the ball hitting the paddle, causing residents to sue over health issues, stress, and decreased property values. There are various Florida locations and all across the country where there's lawsuits emerging and currently pending over the noise from the pickleball courts. Hillsborough County is considering banning pickleball courts. Winter Park also has changed their regulations.
These courts are less than 100 feet from the existing homes in Woodside, and the pickleball courts are within 10 to 15 feet of the proposed home sites in Creek Crossing. Who wants to live next to that? Thank you.
Thank you. And after that will be Stephen Walton.
I'll pass. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Father Victor Lopez, and I come before you today as a Catholic priest. But before I put this hardware on, I practiced tax law in New York for 25 years. I represented some of the most prominent people and companies in the world. Rockefeller Center, Rockefeller family, Sir James Goldsmith, one of the 100 richest men in the world, Warren Cable. So I know the code, the law, the regs, the rules, all of that. And I look today with what was asked by this builder to waive a number of these rules. The rules are put in by law, by regulation, to protect the public interest. And in large part this day, that's what you're asked to do, to enforce that, to protect the public interest. Buildable lot waivers, width waivers, street waivers, bridge waivers, all on a blanket basis. Now, there might be reason to have a specific reason to waive a law, a rule, or regulation, but not on a grassroots basis. What I'm asking you to do is let the law, the rules, and the regulations work. Make the builder adhere to what the legislatures have put forth in these rules and regulations. Now, specifically, I was laughing at his statistical analysis of the trees, in that I must remember to present a statistical analysis to the Internal Revenue Service, which I totally skewed in my client's best interest. Unless a stat sample can be done by a totally independent group and paid for by a totally independent group, it's always subject to something else that can happen. On a lighter note, all of us live in Florida. I moved here almost 30 years ago. I really enjoy it. We enjoy the wildlife. We have otters and wood stalks and gators. The other night, one of our cameras in our Spruce Creek caught a bobcat going through the backyard, right adjacent to the property. He was one of the original members of Volusia County. Part of these rules and regulations put in to protect his interests too. So please keep that in mind when you rule on these. Have the builder adhere to the rules and regulations. Thank you.
Catherine Ponte?
I just went.
No? Okay. Suzanne Trevor. And then follow that, after her will be David Gull. Looks like.
Good morning. I'm Suzanne Schreiber with Green Volusia. I'm reading a letter from the agenda packet from Tom and Rose San Antonio in Port Orange. Dear members of the Volusia County Planning and Development Division, I write to express my strong opposition to the proposed Spruce Creek Crossing development located between the Spruce Creek Fly-In and Quiet Place in the country. I urge you to deny approval of this project due to the severe flooding risk and infrastructure burdens it will impose on the surrounding communities, including my own. As a resident of Quiet Place in the country, I have firsthand experience with devastating impacts of flooding caused by unnamed storms and multiple hurricanes in recent years. These storms have inflicted significant damage on our neighborhood, including flooding of homes and road repairs, burdens that our community is still struggling to repair. The proposed development will further strain an already fragile drainage system by increasing impervious surface runoff and further restricting the natural outflow of water through Spruce Creek. The area is already highly susceptible to severe flooding, and any additional development will only exacerbate the problem, putting more homes and infrastructure at risk. The hope that some retention ponds are effective in mitigating the flood damage to our community has proven false here over an extended period of time. The rapid loss of natural absorption area and restrictions to runoff have overwhelmed the ability of Spruce Creek and its tributaries, serving as runoff avenues for our community to effectively disperse the water, especially when retention ponds are partially filled from high ground levels or other recent rains. The amount of rainfall needed to produce flood conditions in our communities is now significantly less than a decade or more ago, and an increase of flooding levels of only a few more inches will flood an additional significant number of homes and buildings, which have never flooded previously in the 40-plus years since many of them were built. Approving this project would not only disregard the existing hardships faced by residents already, but would also create long-term consequences that will likely require further county resources to address. I strongly urge the county to deny approval of this development and to prioritize responsible growth that does not come at the expense of community safety and sustainability. I thank you all for your time and consideration, and please see the attached photos of our backyard and the corner of Brookside Drive and Quiet Circle. And those were pictures of flooding, gentlemen. So I'm asking personally, have you fixed all the flooding in the area beyond a reasonable doubt? Why not? And why would you consider a new development when the infrastructure to stop the flooding has not been fixed? What is the pollution level of Spruce Creek? And why are you allowing waivers with the knowledge you have on flooding? You have been given a lot of reasonable doubt today. Thank you all for your time.
Yes. David Gall, followed by Palmer, Wilchi.
Good morning, I'm David Gall. I'm a resident of Spruce Creek Fly-In, and I'd like to request a waiver to the time limit and the rules of decorum. Your answer, in line with today's deliberations, should be without objection. If I can't even get these minor waivers from the DRC, then why are we here? Here we are, exactly where we told the county council we'd be when they punted this deliberation to staff, relitigating rules before unelected bureaucrats that were enacted years ago precisely to prevent such proposals as this from proceeding. I'm angry at the waste of our time to have to come here and plead with you to do your jobs. I was staff for a federal agency for 6 years. We had no such discretion as being entertained here. Based on that experience and not knowing what your rules are, I must say some members of this staff need to be scolded. You work for us. In the midst of nationwide No King's protests, you nonchalantly abrogate the democratic will of the people as expressed in the corpus of laws and rules that say expressly what we don't want. Like imperial magistrates, you anticipate favoring a greedy corporation by uncritically failing to object to waiver requests. Your job is to say, no, do your job. We shouldn't be meeting here today if you'd chosen to simply recommend that the county enforce the rules in favor of the majority across years as expressed in our laws and rules, instead of bending them to the will of this sole corporate petitioner. Trees. The proponent wants to bulldoze and clear cut. We fail to account for the benefits of trees in reducing flooding. Trees can remove 25 to 50 times as much water as surface water drainage can. Trees take the water straight into the atmosphere. A reason for the recent increase in flooding is the removal of trees countywide. This proposal would remove approximately 3,000 trees. Where's the engineering analysis to compensate for that loss of drainage capacity? To the proposal, 111 units is not enough to assume fiscal responsibility for the proposed bridge. Spruce Creek POA has about 1,600 members, yet struggles with anticipating the day they have to replace their private entrance bridge. I'm heartened to learn that we have a 15-year history of denying development on this parcel. I would suggest that the history of denial is actually at least 48 years based on my understanding of the arguments surrounding the Spruce Creek PUD. I'm going to run out of time before I finish what I have to say. Can I have that waiver? Building multi-million-dollar homes under the primary departure corridor of the world's busiest private airport is just stupid. Sales will be abysmal. It's a stupid business plan. I said that directly to the proponent a year ago at the first public meeting, and I reiterate it here. I implore you today to deny this proposal.
followed by Rob Pasternak.
Good morning. We live in a quiet place in the country. My wife and I have 4 kids, 2 of them under age 6. We go on walks and bike rides all the time. The roads would no longer be safe with hundreds and more cars a day on these narrow roads with no sidewalks. Do you care about their safety? It's inevitable there will be massive flooding. You're removing thousands of historic trees that absorb stormwater, so where's the water supposed to go except causing our homes to flood? You can't answer that. You don't even have the completed Spruce Creek water basin study, and that reason alone is why it should be denied. Destroying protected wetlands and the habitat for gopher tortoises, what is the point of the laws if you don't follow them? Also, they are required to have an easement to come to a quiet place, and we're not granting that. You cannot make us accept a private bridge for another subdivision. And there's no way they will be able to prove Spruce Creek won't rise at all. It surely will. There are already homes in quiet places that flooded during major storms and hurricanes, so it's ludicrous to think that this bridge and development is not going to make flooding even worse. Common sense says maybe allowing 10 homes here, not 111. When it comes down to it, this development is just selfishness and exploitation and abuse. Where is the common sense? You cannot let them bend and break these rules. It is not too late to follow your conscience and do the right thing. You don't have to let the developers get whatever they want and give them whatever waivers suit their fancy. You can choose integrity here. We will have reduced property values from this development. This is theft and this is wrong. It is stealing our equity from us, forcing us to move and sell at a time when the market sucks, and this will only make it worse. And you're increasing our costs, basically forcing us to get flood insurance, if we even can, increasing our risk just to live and causing us more anxiety. Are you going to treat us the way you would like to be treated here? Where is your conscience, conviction, and moral compass? You're accountable before God, and you'll have to answer to Him for the destruction that you will cause. The blood will be on your hands. Do you really want to have that regret gnawing at you when you're trying to sleep at night and even when you're on your deathbed? These thousands of families matter a lot. The developers are not more important than us. Put yourself in our shoes and treat us the way you want to be treated. Thank you.
How you doing? Rob Pasternak, Tomoka Farms Village. You've heard a lot here tonight, or today so far, that the public is asking you not to approve this for a lot of reasons. The only reason to approve this is profit for a corporate entity which isn't even the current owner of the property. So you're going to essentially steal from the residents of Volusia, which they think they're the owners of the property. We do think we own the property. In a lot of ways we don't, because we can't control these other factors. But you guys were put up here with rules to protect these things. This corporate entity is already asking for a waiver, a very broad, multiple broad waivers of these protections, which the people and the environment of Volusia should have. If you approve those waivers, we don't have those protections anymore. There's a lot of old trees there, there's a lot of great environment. It's a very sensitive area where water comes together to get to Spruce Creek, as mentioned, outstanding Florida waterway. Well, let's treat it like that. How can we fill and build, add a giant bridge? All these changes to this very sensitive area are going to have real effects. And the people are still dealing with the very real effects of flooding, and we don't have a solution for much of that yet. We're still waiting on a study. And matter of fact, some of the last studies have proposed solutions that haven't even been constructed yet. So we are wasting a lot of people's time here today. This should have been an automatic no. We're not going to give blanket waivers. This is a sensitive area. Like Palmer said, yeah, maybe 10 homes, a few homes. These are large plots of land here locally. There's just so many extraneous factors tying into this construction. The only reason to approve, like I say, is profit, and you've heard multiple reasons not to approve this project. I think it's time that those getting paid to sell this idea to the county go back, take their fees, and find something else to do. I don't think we should be doing this. Thank you.
And that would be followed by Orwell Fairbairn.
Hi there, my name is Hart Fessenden and I live in Spruce Creek, Flying. I'd like to look at the big picture for a minute here. I think we've all heard of all the reasons this project is a bad idea. I'm presuming that the mandate of the DRC is to watch out for the public good of the people of Volusia County. And I think it's pretty clear that there's no public good in this project. You've heard multiple reasons from multiple people about that. And it seems to me that this project only benefits an out-of-town developer. Certainly, it doesn't benefit Volusia County. And I think you can see here from all the people that are here on a Tuesday morning that the people of Volusia County don't think this is a good project. And so I would urge you to keep that in mind, because as a citizen of Volusia County, I feel like we're constantly steamrolled by developers who make a quick buck, hit and run, and are gone. And we, the residents of Volusia County, have to pick up the pieces from the flooding, the increased insurance costs, and all the negative benefits that, well, benefits is the wrong word, but all the negative results of all this development. So I urge you to turn down this project. We've heard about all the waivers that are required, which I think is a good enough reason to turn it down. The other thing I'd like to say on a more positive note is that there is a way, I think, for everybody to be satisfied. And what that is that the residents of Spruce Creek have actually made an offer to the developer to buy the project, to buy the property. And the idea is to keep it forever wild. And I would urge the board here to consider that there really is a win-win solution for everybody. The developer gets paid, and the project is forever wild, possibly going to Volusia County or held by the Spruce Creek community, which has no interest whatsoever in developing it and leaving it as it is. It's a beautiful piece of property. I don't know if any of you have ever been there, but you can't beat it, and it's one of the last wild places in Volusia County. We do not want Volusia County to become Fort Lauderdale, urban sprawl. I think that's why we all moved here. Thank you.
Orwell Fairbairn. Jeff Anderson, and followed by Derek Lamonte.
Good morning. Good morning. I've been to more of these meetings trying to fight this kind of stuff, and a lot of these people, you see the same faces here. So hopefully we'll get some resolution. My name is Jeff Anderson. I live in Quiet Place in the Country, 345 Country Circle Drive West. I just want to hit on a few points that have already been addressed, but maybe go into a little detail. So one of the things I have is, I have the original map from Quiet Place in the Country. Okay? John, if you're still here, you probably have one of these. You probably got sold a piece of property based on this. So if you look at the property that is not the box there on the north side of that, which is actually the west side of that line there, which is on the east side of the creek, that's 87 acres. That 87 acres was originally units, I believe it was 8 and 9 of Quiet Place in the Country. And originally, there was a proposal to have 37 homes on that property. They were over 2 acres per lot. There was 37 homes on 87 acres, which is just a hair, like 2.1 or so, which if you know Quiet Place in the Country, most of the lots in Quiet Place are at least 2 acres. So it was consistent with that. And so how do we kind of end up here from the standpoint of how did all 87 acres get left behind?
Well, because Ludlow Corporation, who built Quiet Place in the Country, went out of business in the development of it, which is one of the concerns that's been brought up today. What happens if this all goes south in the middle of construction? Because there's going to be a lot of costs involved with it. I don't even understand financially how you can build a bridge of that cost and recoup it out of that small number of lots. It's got to be some expensive ass lots. So that's how we've kind of ended up in this position that we're in. So to grant the waivers essentially becomes somewhat of like a government bailout before it's even really needed. Because the only way that this works is to have the number of homes in there, the number of lots that you need to do it. So it's not about the land, it's about the bottom line. And the bottom line doesn't work if you don't have the number of homes. So let's ask for a bunch of waivers so we can get there. I'd also like to talk just briefly about the impact of Quiet Place. I bought my property in '96. I've lived there since 2003 when we built our home. And it has been a fight for the 20 some odd years that I've lived there just to get our roads maintained, just to get the drainage easements, the creeks and whatnot cleared. I recently dealt with Ben, and thank you for the work that you did in getting a lot of that work done. But we can't handle the water that we have now. They want, part of it is problems with hand clearing these so-called ditches that aren't ditches on my easement. They're on my survey. They're actually drainage easements. So we're in a predicament now, and it's only going to get worse. So thank you.
Sir, if you'll submit that to the record, please. Thank you.
Derek Lamont.
Hi, good morning. My name is Derek Lamontagne. I'm the Executive Director of Spruce Creek River Works. We are a 501c3 with the mission to speak for Spruce Creek. The waterway itself has been mentioned here. A lot of people know it's an outstanding Florida waterway, but a lot of people haven't really talked about how it's impaired and why that's important, because a lot of laws should kick in that would prevent such developments. And I just want to say on the record, yeah, we oppose this and hope you don't. No, but I did want to speak about at least a couple of waivers that were mentioned. So the tree waiver that the gentleman from the applicant talked about, I don't think that's necessary. I mean, you need to analyze all the trees on site because you learn about the history, you learn about what's actually there. You could find endangered species of trees or other things. If you have a scientist out there evaluating the whole thing, it is over 100 acres, so that is important. You shouldn't just waive that, just say statistically it's meaningless. There are specific things you can find. There are over 100 at least undiscovered species yet to be found in Florida, according to experts on this matter. But more importantly is that it is the rules. So again, why grant a waiver for such things? And one, you could be funding scientists to go out there and help look at this. Other things I want to mention is that I've seen some of these environmental promises and protections of lands just waived. So really they're promises that you shouldn't give a lot of weight to if they're saying they're going to protect some. And I did want to point out that pine trees themselves do matter too. I think one of the experts for the applicant said something like, oh, they're not even native or something. That's not true. They're used by woodpeckers, a lot of different species. And actually they help with flooding. In case anyone has never seen them soak up water, they're really good at that. So definitely want to keep all kinds of trees, cypress, pines, and everything. But I did want to just touch on the fact that, again, a BMAP, in case this hasn't really been discussed, is a basic management action plan. The state is behind in doing this. Since 2008, Spruce Creek has been found to be impaired. That means polluted for various nutrients, some other fecal coliform, things like that. And since 2008, the state is required to create a BMAP that protects the entire watershed. But because we don't have that in place, the state just completely ignored our area. They also ignored Tomoka and basically all of Volusia. It's allowed this rampant development in the last decade plus. And I would say no development should be approved in the Spruce Creek watershed until we have such a large, comprehensive management plan in place, which we don't. So again, for pollution reasons of the waterway itself, for flooding reasons, and just for the citizens, their rights to have a peaceful way of life. We definitely hope we can deny this and check out our nonprofit, because again, we're advocating for this, and we hope you guys go to savesprucecreek.org and see how we can help advocate for the waterway and the people living around it. Thank you very much.
I have no additional forms.
Okay, I appreciate everybody's testimony here today. I'm going to close public comment now, and next I'm going to hear from Mr. Watts for rebuttal.
3 minutes? Yeah, 3 minutes. We got a waiver.
Or good evening. 3 minutes? Since we've been here that long. Yeah. I think I can still say good morning. I appreciate the opportunity to come back up. Obviously, a lot has been said. And I want to kind of go back to what I said at the very beginning, of this process. We recognize the importance of the discussion here today. And what we're here talking about is how do we work through compliance with the requirements that you guys set forth in your code. I put them up in my presentation earlier and walked through the specific point-by-point items that are required as part of the conservation subdivision. There's a couple specific points I want to talk about, but I don't want to belabor, stuff that we've already talked about or things that, come later in the process. So let me start with that. At the very beginning of the discussion in the staff report and in kind of our outline of where we are in this process, we are at the overall development plan stage. There have been a tremendous number of very good points and questions raised regarding final design issues. Those are things that I think absolutely have to be addressed. I think Mr. Moya talked about, the specific elements of the stormwater plan, the specific elements of how that system is going to be designed. I'm going to ask Dave Evans to step back up and talk just a little bit about what we've done so far and then what remains to be done with regard to that design.
Thanks, Mark. Again, David Evans, Evans Engineering. We've done a very extensive and thorough evaluation of the stormwater elements of this project from day one back a year and a half ago, based on the fact that we understood the sensitivity of that issue during this design process. So the stormwater calculations, we had geotechnical reports, the soils analysis, we had environmental report, Bill Griffey's here, all studied all the different elements of off-site, on-site contributions to this project, because we knew that was probably item number one when it came to the area of Spruce Creek. So in our evaluations, we looked at everything surrounding the property. We have certainly looked and spoken with and continue to work with Spruce Creek Client on their stormwater systems and how they operate and how they integrate with us. And I kind of mentioned that earlier based on outfall locations that we've worked with them on and continue to work through them through the final engineering process. So those issues relative to that, the maps that they brought up, which are preliminary engineering and drainage flow path maps are just that. We've got environmental scientist Bill Griffey here also that studied the hydrology and then also the vegetation and wetland types to confirm that the wetlands that are being impacted are isolated. So it's a combination of things. You understand how this all works. We've done a lot of work on the front end to do this for a year and a half and work with staff certainly on those issues too to make sure that we're consistent with what we have done with the stormwater calculations, the runoff calculations, on-site contributions, off-site contributions, and our flow paths. So you see storm ponds in the plan. Storm ponds are there for a reason. They're in the calculations. We've used the current criteria and the old criteria because we actually bridged the point at which the water management district or the state requirements changed. That was the first of this year. So we started back before that in early 2025, go through the changes, and now we've reflected the changes in the stormwater calculations too. Again, that's the calculations that are not necessarily required for an ODP, but they will be carried through to the final preliminary plat and final construction plans. Again, meeting the criteria and having to obtain permits on all this stuff. We understand what we have to do going forward relative to the state permitting requirements and the local permitting requirements, and we're ready to do that. So, thank you.
Just want to pause and see if there were any other questions. So again, I think in general, there are a lot of very specific questions, and I agree wholeheartedly. Those questions have to be answered, and I think some people take that process, and criticize based on it, because what you're looking at here is conceptual level of detail. I think we had a speaker that talked about, don't approve this if we're not showing compliance with the OFW regulations, if we're not showing compliance with all of the floodplain standards, if we're not showing compliance with water quality standards in the new, the updated St. John's permitting requirements. We're not asking for a waiver to any of those things. We're not asking for a waiver to any of those things. Those are the things that come and are required as the next step in your process. And if we can't provide to your satisfaction, to agency satisfaction, that we are meeting those standards and meeting the permitting requirements that are held up for each of those, then it won't approve beyond that point. The purpose of the ODP is, I said this at the very beginning, we have to know what we're going to design before we can start to design. And so the purpose of being here today is to say, this is the concept. This is the general concept. If this concept meets the standards, the things that have been outlined in the conservation subdivision, again, not a rezoning, it's just an application of part of your code. Because I think there was a little bit of confusion in some of this made regarding whether that was a rezoning or not. The purpose of the ODP is to say the general layout meets our requirements. The overall proposal is consistent with the comprehensive plan, appears to be consistent with land development regulations, subject to all of the technical design requirements and permitting that comes after. To me, there are two principal kind of key issues that I think are in play with regard to the overall design and the comments that have been raised. One is the question of the 60-40 mix, whether or not this layout meets the intent of the conservation subdivision with regard to the 60-40 mix. If you look at subsection, I think it's C10, A, B, and C, that defines the 60 and the 40. In that section, you've got a statement in section C10 that defines my presentation there. Up back up for a second. So in talking about the components of that we've addressed today, I'm not, I want to put the words of the code back out there versus, characterizing them myself. Okay, thank you. Okay, so going back to those standards. So at least 60% of the gross land area of proposed subdivisions shall be designated as permanent protected open space, managed for either passive recreation, agriculture, conservation purposes, or floodplain compensation, and on which the underlying development rights of the open space have been severed through permanent easements consistent with the applicable use. The subsections that are included in there that make up the components of that 60% are conservation areas. I think those relatively speak for themselves, but conservation areas, water courses, water bodies, associated buffers, areas around eagle's nests, land conserved for the protection of native, and endangered flora and fauna. This list of things defines that component of that 60%, and I agree. I think that's what we have in mind when you're talking about conservation subdivisions. And in fact, that makes up the vast majority of what is included in our calculation. The other elements that are in the code, however, are in the code. Common open space. Open space set aside for passive recreational purposes. May include accessory buildings, improvements necessary or appropriate for recreational uses and public uses, as shown in the development plan, including areas required for stormwater management and septic drainage systems. Again, I think that kind of speaks for itself. That's part of the calculation that we put in front of your staff and that is in front of you today. Also provides for agricultural areas. Active agricultural areas can continue to be a portion of that 60%. And this is how this section of the code in that 60-40 split has been read and interpreted, not only as we've gone through the process, but because it's been reviewed. So I think this is one of the key points that I see as a disagreement. I think you've got the information in front of you to agree that it complies with the standard here. The other is the waiver on waiver number 1. I really think that's a key from the standpoint of where we are because it affects the overall layout and design, and that's part of what you're looking at with the ODP. You've heard from Mr. Griffey with regard to our review of that wetland area, and whether or not we believe that it is lower quality, higher quality. I think we differ with some of the other experts that have been before you today. But I think what we haven't suggested is that we're going to be exempt from that permit. We are required to ask for a waiver for just the footprint of residential areas that are included within the plan. So I think because that waiver's here, that's another key one that would change the overall configuration if you were to, go one way or another with regard to that specific waiver. The other waivers, again, are necessary because they address things that are in your code. I think, again, just to make sure that you're clear on it, I think there's still a little bit of confusion with regard to the waiver that's being requested for the statistical tree survey. It's only proposed in the area that is not being proposed to have the impacts or have any clear. And I agree there's scientific value to surveying it anyway, but it's an efficient way of working through the development review process to provide statistical information for that conservation area that is within the region not being otherwise impacted. With regard to the access, again, I said at the very beginning, talking about the access and the waiver for the public road width and the pavement width, that's really a feature of history. It is the road network that provides public road access to this particular parcel. And so, I think that's a necessary thing that is not, it's not affecting what happens on the property, it only affects how you get to the property, and it simply acknowledges the existing condition. And then finally, the 20%, lots per year. That waiver, frankly, is one that you could defer. I mean, you could bring that up at preliminary plat. It really focuses more on the phasing and how you move forward with the overall development. But as you're planning that and reviewing it during PPL, it would be a good answer to have. And I, again, say it's not necessarily a necessary one at this point in time. But in any event, I'm happy to answer any other questions you might have. We've got the rest of our team here and our technical team here if you have any specific questions about environmental impacts or the engineering with regard to the project. I appreciate your time.
Mark, you had mentioned with regards to the wetland impacts of that 42,900 square feet. At what point does the St. John's Water Management District come and do their wetland analysis? Because I think the issue that I'm having is the distinction between what you're saying is low impact and heard some other things about higher impacts in terms of the wetlands there. At what point during this process does the St. John's Water Management District get involved?
That would be part of the permitting that is done and required as part of the preliminary plat process. Let me bring Bill Griffey up if I can to speak a little more about that process. Thank you.
Yes, we have to submit to the St. John's River Water Management District, and when we submit to them, we would submit to the Army Corps of Engineers as well. And then they would respond in 30 days with a request for additional information. And one of those comments would be to schedule a site visit. And then we would schedule a wetland review, and then once we're on site, then we score the wetlands with those reviewers during the site visit. So it's when we submit.
Thank you. I don't have any more questions for you all.
Thank you.
Any questions for staff?
Hello, I got a question. The rule on creating lots within wetlands, that's a unique feature of the conservation subdivision, correct?
That's correct. That's why they have to ask for a waiver for the 4,200 square feet that is identified in the staff report, and not request a waiver for, say, the impacts caused by the access for the bridge. So it pertains to the creation of lots in the conservation subdivision through the destruction of wetlands.
Are there advantages to going the conservation sub route provided you meet all the requirements in there versus going the traditional PUD or something like that?
Yes, this is something for maybe your planners, because they're the experts, but, you know, there's a lot of flexibility in terms of lot size. We mentioned the density bonus, or Steve mentioned the density bonus, and in exchange for that, you know, you preserve 60% of the property in what the conservation area defines as open space, which is those 3 components. So there's flexibility that's granted for what you identify as your developable area, and in exchange, you preserve a large swath of the property.
But basically, there's rules in this conservation ordinance that puts requirements on the developer to create an environmentally friendly development. And in turn, they receive certain benefits or advantages over a traditional PUD. Is that, Samantha, you're nodding your head?
Yeah, that is correct.
Okay. That's all I got.
Well, you got any other questions? Do you want to take them one?
Well, I'm actually ready to make a motion. It's going to be a little bit of let me make the motion and I'll offer up some explanation. I make a motion to deny ODP 2026-ODP 0042, as well as waiver, to deny waiver number 1, the impacts to wetlands for the creation of residential lots. Included in that motion, I move to defer action on waivers 2, 3, and 4. And I'll just state the reason for that is because a denial based on waiver number 1 would necessitate or require a potential redesign of the conceptual plan that may or may not require waivers 2, 3, and 4. That's my motion.
I'll second.
All in favor of the motion? Or further discussion?
I have a question for clarification. So are you denying the entire development, or are you just denying the waiver to impact the residential?
I'm denying the waiver as well as the entire development because denying the waiver requires a redesign of the conceptual plan.
That's my understanding is, I think a lot of us stated it, that waiver 1 dictates your site design layout.
Any other further discussion? All in favor of the motion? Aye. Aye. Motion carries 3-0.